Welcome to Spirit Gym. Some people cure their health problems with medication. Others try strict diets or expensive treatments. Paul's guest today is Daniel Firth Griffith, and his solution was to buy chickens, 100 of them. And somehow that turned into 400 acres of regenerative farmland, a herd of wild horses, and a deep reconnection with the living soil beneath his feet. Daniel's journey took him from the pain of a degenerative bone disease to the magic of farming, from the brink of giving up to the deep joy of living in relationship with the land and the animals, and a revival of those ancient stories that carry medicine for the body and the soul. In this conversation, Daniel shares how real healing begins with the soil, why myths are more than old tales, and the unexpected ways food, story, and nature conspire to make us whole. Before we dive in, we'd like to say thank you for listening, as this podcast would not be possible without you, our subscribers and followers. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, Organifi, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, Wild Pastures, Peak Life, and Correct. You'll hear their special offers and discounts throughout this episode, or you can visit the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast. And if you want to explore the deeper levels of connection and conversation available in Paul's Spirit Gym membership community, you can go to myspiritgym.com for details.
Well, you guys, we have a special guest today, Daniel Firth Griffith. I've just spent some time reading his book, The Plane of Pillars, and it's quite an extraordinary book. The writing style is very unique. It's like you're sitting around the campfire with a professional storyteller who takes you not only on a deep journey, but deep into yourself in many, many ways. It can be quite a meditative, reflective experience, not like reading a typical story, because the archetypal structure of Daniel's storytelling will grab you by the psyche, whether you like it or not. And Daniel was highly recommended to me by one of my very best friends, Kyle Kingsbury, and his recommendations are always excellent. I read Daniel's website, and it's very clear to me that what he's inspired by and up to is not only beautiful, but very important to the world, which is why I'm excited to have him here today. So Daniel, welcome.
Hey, Paul. No, blessing to be with you.
Thank you.
The kinship is shared.
Thank
really
you.
Shared. I'm excited.
Well, Daniel, from our email exchanges and reading through your book, The Plane of Pillars, and reading your website, I like you, feel a great sense of kinship. I think you're, putting your attention and intention into things that are super, we can't even measure the importance of them today, especially with the consideration of our children's future. But to begin with, I always like the listeners to have a sense of who it is that they're engaging. So maybe you can share an overview of your life and what developed you into the man you are today, and also what has inspired such a creative outpouring from your soul, because you, like me, seem to be able to sit down and just let it flow. I mean, you've written a lot of books and you don't seem short on words.
No, I appreciate the space, the platform, Paul. It's a great question. I've answered it in many different ways, in many different conversations and like speeches that I've given, and I summarized it in one of my previous books, a book I didn't get to share with you. And every time I speak about it, I approach it from a new angle. It's a very living story. I know in this conversation we'll talk a bit about myth, and that's going to be the strings that I play there on that harp. That myth is living. It needs to be living. It needs to be rooted. And so every time I approach this conversation, this intro into my own life and what inspired it, it's always a little different, and that excites me. So thank you for providing that excitement. It never in my life did I think I would be in the situation I am today. I was a homeschool child, lived in Northeast Ohio, just outside of the suburbs of Cleveland. My mom was an immigrant from Polish ancestry, Lithuanian, Polish ancestry, and grew up in a very poor and dark neighborhood on the east side of Cleveland. And we were raised just south of it. And what she wanted to do is, looking back, and at the time I didn't know it, but looking back and talking to her, it was clear what she wanted to give us was the exact opposite childhood, a very ancient childhood than she had. Maybe a bit of ancestral remembering, if you will, although I don't think that she would have used that language then. But we were raised on 30 acres, very wild childhood. Not really a large fan of the unschooling curricula of today, although I think our childhood was very similar to it. We had outside playtime every single day. We did very little schoolwork. Her entire passion was to teach us how to learn, that is to say, how we learn, and then give us the freedom and the liberty to exercise that passion, that trace, to walk that trail, if you will, at our own discretion. So I always joke with people, the last math I ever took in like primary, school, K through 12, was Algebra 1, which like my wife took in like 8th grade, and most people take in 8th grade or 9th grade. But that was like the last math I ever took. And then I went to college, for no reason other than I just didn't like math. And so she wasn't going to push it. And I went to college, took a math class, fell in love with it, and realized that it was a huge passion of mine. Majored in college, graduated at the top of my class in mathematics and computer science. And I mean, that's an interesting little side story, I guess. But that's really the verve, like the verdure of our youth, that really inspired this ability to learn, the desire to learn, the desire to express those things, I think. Well, anyways, huge path diverted in middle school when I found out that I loved sports and athletics. Ended up being a national champion wrestler, was training in the MMA, and had dreams of like fighting in the UFC. And I was a Division I college football player and such, or at least Division I college recruit. And then my junior year, the summer in between my junior year and senior year in high school, I was diagnosed with some pretty serious health concerns. And for about 6 years following it, my entire life job was, let's not die. It was pretty serious.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it was the modus of our attention to some very large degree. I lost the ability to walk, had many, many, many surgeries, all the limbs taking off my body, lived at the Cleveland Clinic, relearned how to walk again. I always joke that I lost the ability to poop, to take a shit for like 2 months, and I just lived on an IV, and
you had
that
a
was
neurological
painful.
disorder?
Yeah, I mean, it was everything. Yeah. The degenerative bone disease, my bones collapse. A lot of the sockets in my body, the ball and joint sockets, for instance, like the femoral head is misshapen. It's like a square. It's not a circle. And as we reshape it to come back a circle again, because it's just eroding my pelvic bones and the labrum structures and the ligaments and everything else, it just forms back into that and erodes and deteriorates and such. And so it's a neurological, it's autoimmune based, it's a bone degenerative disease. And really long story short, about maybe 10 years into struggling through that, we traveled all over the world, lived in hospitals. Like I said, lost the ability to walk. Way too many surgeries, way too many hospitals became home. I remember I was sitting in the back porch of my family's, like my childhood home, and I was reading a book. And it was a book about agriculture, of all things. My godfather, if you will, had gifted me the book. And I was just reading it, passing the time, couldn't really walk, had sores all over my body. And it was a very painful time. And I'll never forget my mom. She walked out of the back sliding glass door of the house, and my wife, I was married to by this time, she was off at work. She worked full time. And my mom looked at me and she said, "Daniel, we've tried everything." And I was like, "Yeah, Mom, it's true. We have. We've tried everything, as I've mentioned, or at least alluded to." And she said, "But the only thing we haven't tried is chickens." And she said it just like that. And my response was just like you provide. I laughed, kind of snarled, I smirked, sneered maybe. And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Well, the only thing we haven't tried is chickens, right? We've been searching for health, medicines, doctors, things like this. And those have their place, of course. Maybe a smaller place than most people think, but they absolutely have their course, have their way in this world, and they're needed. But we never tried food. We never tried energy. We never tried actual healing. We never tried participation and reciprocity and relationship in these things."
Yeah.
And so we bought 100 chickens that day, and we started raising them. I didn't know a diddly squat about anything agricultural. I was a computer science and math major. Loved history. Didn't write too much at the time. Never really had a passion for writing until much later. Saw my life going into more of the software, computational science sphere or space. And bought the 100 chickens and just moved forward with it. And we started to learn that raw living food is best. That local food is the only version of raw living food that you can habitually attain. And then we started to fall in love with the farmers producing that local, raw, living food. And then we started to fall in love with the lives of those farmers, and we started to farm. And I started to volunteer at a 200 head cow calf operation, a regenerative farm up in Northeast Ohio. And they couldn't pay me because I wasn't worth a dime. Not only one, because I barely walk, but two, I never farmed before, So I didn't know what I didn't know. And to some degree, I was a massive hurdle to their operation, but they loved me and they let me on, and they paid me in bones and organs because it was the only
That's
thing
a
in the
good
freezers.
payment.
Yeah, it was the only thing in the freezer.
We might
that they
end up
couldn't
back
move.
there soon.
Yeah. That's exactly where my life is now. And so they paid me in bones and organs and said, thanks for helping out. Thanks for, corralling the cattle and moving them and tagging calves and things. And the worthless, attempt that I could provide, but they paid me in those things, and health started to return, and we started to fall in love with it, as I said, and then we started farming even more and more, and now my wife and I, 15 years later, run a 400-acre, what we call concentric rewilding operation, or beyond regenerative farm. We can play with that language and nomenclature later, I guess. And there's, 150 head of cattle to my left. Literally, they're just grazing our house's yard here, and goats and sheep, and we train horses. We train logging horses, so we breed horses that are unshoed, ungrained, unbarned, just pretty much wild Mustangs that also pull logs. That's a huge passion of ours. We do a lot of things: build cabins, hand-hewed log cabins, and obviously write books.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really leads into it. I think if I had to boil that story down, I think all stories have meaning. I think humans are a storytelling species. That to some degree is what makes us. And so if that story has anything to say, I don't know. I think there's a lot of things, the difference between active health and passive health.
Totally.
The idea that health is out there, that the idea that you can participate in it. I think one of the more interesting things that I've been playing with recently, though, is the idea that in the beginning, our health journey is selfish, and that's fine. I think a lot of people listen to people like myself, or maybe even people like you, and they immediately start to think that the end of the journey is the beginning, like where we are at in our 15, 20, 30, 40 years of experience and journeying into that more reciprocal, more relationship, more kinship-based health, ceremony, medicine, and all of the things in between is how we started in the beginning. And I think at the beginning, it's very important to not see the end, but to be selfish, to find that nourishment, to make it yours, to not understand why a living carrot is good, but to enjoy carrot. Right? I had a professor in college who walked into this old Lithuanian man. I had a special kinship with him, and he walked into our class. It was like an 8 a.m. Monday morning class, and everybody hated the class, as you can imagine. He walked in, and like I said, he's just old. He died that next summer from cancer, I think. And anyways, painting the picture, he was slow and definitely aged. His age had found him, I guess you could say. And he walked into the class, and he said, "Who here has tasted potato?" And I'll never forget the moment. All of the kids in the class just looked at each other, all these college sophomores, not knowing the left from the right hand. And to some degree, it's Monday morning, so that also broke into some things. But we all looked at each other and we're like, yeah, okay, whatever. Yeah, we've all had French fries, hash browns, etc. And one student, blurted out something along the lines of like, "Oh, I've tasted potato." And he goes, "Well, what does it taste like?" And the student, I don't remember how they responded, but they said something to the regard of it's savory or it's sweet or it's salty, or, it has that ketchupy, tangy vinegar, taste at the front of their palate. Or they described potatoes as they've interacted with potatoes. And the professor said, "No, that's not a potato. I want to know who here has tasted potato, not French fries, not hash browns, not mashed
I would have said
potatoes
they
with sour
taste like
cream.
the earth.
They taste like the earth," right? So like, who here has known potato? And I think finding that, I think, is the first step. That was our first step. Like, actually, I was at a farmer's market. One of the very first days we transitioned after we bought the chickens. And one of the farmers looked at me, and I had his bag of carrots that took off his table. And he said, "Watch out, or these will bite you." It was a joke, and like a total passive phrase that this individual probably never even remembers that he said, let alone thought. But in that moment, I realized that like that food was living, like that those carrots could bite you, just as if you were reaching, into a den of lions, or whatever the simile, the extension, the example would be, and be there, and I think that's really important. But don't be satisfied there. I think that's a huge difference between simply finding health in the modern sense, that is to say, a solve to your autoimmune conditions or a solve to your degenerative bone diseases or whatever, as a lasting point, that end point, but to keep going, right? To keep finding that fluidity, to keep letting that language evolve, that kinship evolve, that relationship develop and root in new places at all times, right? Like, be a tree that has roots, but then send seeds. And as you let the seeds go, allow them to root and reroot and root and reroot. And so it begins selfish. I think that's very important. And then it emerges because it's not happy in that place, but it's satisfied in that place. So there's an urgency and a haste that has to find that tension, right? Find that tension between urgency and haste, and then move forward. And I guess the moving forward is what we've been doing, my wife and I and our 3 children for, well, all 5 of us for the last 7 years, because our oldest is 7, but generally speaking for the last 15 years.
Matcha has been in the news recently amidst its rising popularity, which has put a bit of a strain on the global supply of the tea. But one thing you can be sure of with Peak's Sun Goddess Matcha, you are getting one-of-a-kind, 100% organic, ceremonial-grade matcha crafted for those who seek the highest purity, quality, and its powerful health benefits. It's made by third-generation tea masters using 130-year-old techniques, where it is hand-harvested from the first tender leaves of spring and shaded for a 35% longer period than the norm. This gives Peak's matcha maximum potential to produce antioxidants, chlorophyll, and L-theanine. Sun Goddess Matcha is grown in Kagoshima, Japan, a pristine region known for its volcanic soil, lush valleys, and natural purity. In fact, legend has it that the great sun goddess, Amaterasu, appeared at a sacred volcano within sight of these very tea gardens, blessing the land with her pure, radiant light. The very soil that nourishes Peak's tea is infused with her energy, enriched by the volcanic earth and bathed in the golden glow of the sun. Peak Sun Goddess Matcha is a firm favourite here at the Chek household, with its traditional umami flavour, creamy rich taste, and a gentle energy boost without the usual caffeine jitters. Simply whisk a sachet with warm water and add your choice of sweetener and milk for a delicious latte, or pour over ice for a refreshing iced matcha. Right now, you can get 20% off for life, plus a free starter kit with your first order. This includes a rechargeable frother and a glass beaker, so you can create your own matcha ceremony at home. Go to peaklifecom/Paul Chek. That's PIQUE life.com/Paul Chek.
Beautiful. We brought up 2 vegetables that have some unique properties that you may or may not know about. Have you ever used potato juice before? Raw potato juice?
I've had it. I don't know what you mean by use.
Well, use it for medicinal purposes.
Oh,
it
okay.
tastes just like you're drinking dirt.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. I follow. Yeah.
Potato turns out to have amino acids in it that are very bioavailable, and it's one of the things that I've used. I learned about it from, what's his name? One of the old health pioneers. He's written a number of books. His name will come back to me. He was actually somebody that I think was a source of wisdom for Jack LaLanne. If his name comes back to me, but when people have leaky gut syndrome and any kind of inflammatory condition of the small intestine or stomach where they can't absorb proteins very well, if you juice potatoes, it'll actually provide bioavailable amino acids that they can actually absorb, because the amino acids in the juice don't require much digestion at all. They can practically go right through the small intestine up into the liver and then into the body.
Wow.
And one of the things that I've done, I'm someone who's very into subtle energies, and I'm clairvoyant and been working with these energies for a long time. But I was reading a book by a healer one time, and he talked about how you can use carrots very much like you use an acupuncture needle, as long as the top is still on and you don't clip the tip of the root. And so I began testing this, and lo and behold, it works a lot better in the sunshine. You can take a carrot right out of the ground, as long as you don't snap the tip off, because you need the point to direct the energy. And if you hold the carrot top, the green, toward the sun, you can feel it emitting a very clear energy, like almost like a laser pointer does. You can actually treat the acupuncture points with it. You can put energy into chakras with it. And I've had very sick patients in the past and my soul directed me to using the carrot as an energy source because it produces such a different source of energy and information that seems to have a very profound healing effect on the body that's even beyond what you get from an acupuncture needle.
Wow.
So you might be amazed to take a carrot out of the ground and point it at if you're right-handed, your left feminine palm, because you got a powerful chakra in your hand, and just hold it off the hand and slowly move it into your hand, and you will literally feel like a beam of light coming from that carrot into your hand, and you'll feel what it's doing to your body. So there you go. Your potatoes and your carrots are very living contributors to our myth.
Yeah. I didn't know those things. It's not surprising to me, though, because one of the more true things I've heard somebody say is that humanity is just clay that took our fungi and bacteria with us. And we're a species eternally trying to become rooted once again. Like culture, like genes move very slowly, right? So as genes develop and evolve and adapt and mutate, they move very slowly. They move with gestation, right? So for instance, you take a domestic pig and you put her out into the wild, she becomes very feral very quickly, and her entire physiography changes. I mean, her nose, her muzzle, if you will, it reduces in size. Her body changes its length. I mean, she can change over the generations very quickly. And their gestation is 3 weeks. 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days. Whereas obviously human gestation is 9 months, and cattle gestation is 9 months. And horses are very hard to phenotypically adapt to the landscape because they're 11, 12-month, even sometimes 13-month gestation. It's fluid in that way. And so to some degree, I think it's also true from a biological evolutionary perspective in terms of gene mutation, moving through reproduction, that culture is very important to genes in gene transfer, because through culture, genes can move faster than just through reproduction.
Yes.
Huge, bigger topic there. But at the same time, I think the culture of humanity being rooted or trying to eternally find that rooted grace to ourselves, I think is very intrinsic to the human experience. And I can see that in culture and even the mythology of cultures as well. And so when you're thinking about roots and root vegetables like the potato and the carrot, it's not surprising to me that two very strong rooted, obviously tuber-like structures, vegetables, starches, have that connective power back to humanity. So
yeah, and the roots, of course, channel the energy of the light into the earth to enliven the earth. So they're not only feeding their own product, be it the carrot, the potato, or the fruit, but they're actually energizing and nourishing and enlivening the soil and the soil microorganisms, which is, unfortunately, people are so void of understanding of the cycle of life, the wheel of life, that they don't realize what's happening all around them. And I think, that's what I've spent my whole career trying to do, is awaken people to what it takes to be a healthy person. Because I've had countless cases just like you, right? The person you described yourself as younger was a common client for me to see in my career. People came from all over the world as medical failures, and I applied exactly what your chicken story was to them, and have had a very, good track record of doing what seemed like miracles to other people, but it was really Mother Nature doing what she always does.
Yeah, a good friend of mine, a mentor and a brother. His name is Taylor Keene. He's Omaha, of the Earth and Bison clan. He always says, until we love Mother as Mother, not like Mother, we can never grow, learn, or heal. And I think that's very true. I think it's very true. Like, it's there, and it feels like magic. And to some degree, I think it's very healthy to call it magic. I think that's one of the blessings of mythology, to give us that language. Another friend of mine, he's a Oglala Sioux, a Lakota, a pipe carrier, Hogapitopa, 4 arrows. He talks about, he wrote a whole book on neurophilosophy of all things, and the name of it might come to me. I think he co-wrote the book with Dr. Greg Cajet, who's a Blackfoot, a Pukani, I think. Anyways, he talks about hypnosis and the role of hypnosis and ceremony in helping us see and accept that magic, and how that's just also common to the human condition, which I know is probably a thought, or at least a taste that you've had before.
I work with it all the time.
Yeah. So I think that's really healthy. Like, whether or not you think it's a scientific reality or a faith in magic, it's just Mother working. And, I think it's really important just to see mother as mother, not like mother.
Yeah.
Which, is a whole pregnant conversation as it is.
Yeah. The name came back to me. The potato concept, juicing potatoes, was from Paul C. Bragg. Are you familiar with him at all?
Yeah. I've not read much of his work, but I understand the name. Yep.
Yeah, he has a lot of great stuff, kind of old school stuff. For example, he talks about if you're working in really hot environments, the best thing you can do to help your body regulate its temperature and even get burn protection is to juice celery, because celery turns out to have a high amount of selenium, which helps the body regulate temperature more effectively. So he's got a lot of really interesting things like that. And in my younger days of really researching and testing a lot of this stuff, I would juice carrots, I would juice celery, and I would go test it. I would drink potato juice. If you don't try, you don't know, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of built my knowledge base out of practice. But you talked about magic. There's two different kinds of magic. Are you familiar with the distinction between magic and magick?
No, not linguistically, no.
Well, interestingly, magic, magic, is sleight of hand. It means
I see.
that you don't understand the illusion.
Yeah.
Right? The magician knows what's going on. Like, the magician knows how to saw somebody in half and make it look real, but they're obviously not sawing somebody in half. Right. So there's an illusion that you can't understand, but magick is the natural magic that is inherent all throughout nature and is the basis of things like the Wicca religion, or what witches used to do to heal people, to make brew. Ayahuasca would be made out of magic, for example.
Right.
All your plant medicines are magic with a K. Practicing health, using your mind in positive ways to have a clear intention, and manifesting your dreams, that's magick. And I think, unfortunately, today, with all the modern technology, people have gotten so lost in the sleight of hand that they have lost touch with the very magic that you talked about being the source of healing for you and inspiration for, obviously, reading in your book here, I could see you're very well connected to the earth and to the magick of it all. Hi, everybody. Have you ever wondered why your blood is red? It's because it's full of oxygen and life force. It's what keeps you going. But what if I could tell you about something else that's red that will add more life force and keep you going? And if you start with a red juice before you have coffee or tea and wait a few minutes, you might find that you either don't need the coffee or the tea, or you need less of it. But this time, instead of getting coffee and tea, you got a lot of nutrition and a lot of great stuff for stress management and detoxification. And it's so important. I got Drew Cannoli. It took me 2 years to get him to come hang out with me and talk about this. I said, Drew, tell me more about your red juice. And he is right here to tell us what is on with your red juice. My kids love it. Everybody I know loves it.
Well, I love that we have it for kids, because
Yes.
when I was a kid, there was this big red dude that would burst through a brick wall, and he was like, oh, yeah. He would feed me a glass of 50 grams of sugar, giving most people diabetes, ADHD, addiction,
obesity,
all the things, right? So when we created Red, it was, what's the alternative? If we could create something that could create lasting stamina, lasting energy, and then we started to look at our ancient ancestors. We talk about the Vikings, the people that were rowing across the oceans for days to go to war. What were they taking? Well, they were taking rhodiola. Rhodiola is in our red juice. And then we were like, okay, so out of all the mushrooms, what's one of the best medicinal mushrooms that can give us long-lasting energy? We found cordyceps. Cordyceps are absolutely amazing. Not just any cordyceps or rhodiola, glyphosate residue-free and organic. And how can we make it taste better Then how do we make it taste better than that without the sugar?
Yeah.
We added a little monk fruit.
Monk fruit's amazing.
Yep. And we found the best berries on the planet. Berries in high amounts, which we have in the red juice, actually help increase stem cell creation in your body. What's better than that for our little ones and for us?
Yes.
And so many people are just lethargic. They're lacking energy.
Yes.
What could we do for that? Red juice in the afternoon, 2 p.m. rolls around, instead of a nap, instead of the coffee, drink the red juice. You're going to feel so much better.
Well, if you need the nap, take the nap if you can, but then take the red juice to kick you back into gear.
Exactly. I love naps and I love coffee.
I do too, but I love to make sure I got the nutrition in me first. The other thing is berries are a natural stimulant to the adrenal glands. So if people would do a little red juice before they do coffee and tea, they would pick themselves up naturally, except this time they're bringing in nutrition. And unfortunately, coffee blocks almost every vitamin and mineral you can put in your mouth. So hey, there you have it, right from the man himself.
To try Organifi's red juice and get 20% off your order, go to Organifi.com/Chek20 and use the promo code Chek20 at checkout. That's Organifi.com/CHEK20 and the promo code is CHEK20 for a 20% discount.
So, Daniel, it's clear to me that myth and mythology are at the core of the way you live, think, feel, and write and relate. Can you share your views on what myth is, why it is important today in a world where myth is often confused with a lie, and where you feel myths ultimately emerge from?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. That's a really good question. I think myth as a lie is an interesting concept because I think a lot of people would also equate myth with story in the modern sense. And
Yes.
I've been known to say that the modern storyteller is the bastard child of the oral teller or the mythologist. And I think that's true. I think, that's what I am. I happily say I'm a bastard child of the ancient mythologists. Myth is the transportation of knowledge over time. Culture, in some sense, I think we were talking about this earlier. Culture, in some sense, is the human genetics, or really just genetics in general, trying to move faster, right? So genetics can only move at a reproductive rate. So human gestation is 9 months. We can move a lot slower than, let's say, a feral pig. If I'm an agricultural, I have an agricultural mind, ecological mind. So my brain thinks in this way. But if you have a domestic pig, its snout actually reduces in size because just the way its physiography integrates with the landscape, especially the domestic landscape. But then as you release it in a very short amount of time, that pig's genetics can express themselves in very quick and efficient ways. Gene evolution can be expressed very quickly because the gestation of a pig is very quick. It's 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days. It's not 9 months, or a horse, which is 12 or 13 months. And its snout can actually get very long very quickly. So it can adapt to its landscape much faster. And you see, when you study the culture of animals in this way, you also see that mammals that have longer gestation have more culture than mammals with lower gestation. Not that they're not animistic, not that they're not self-developing and self-evolving and self-deterministic and fully alive in their own ways, but their culture is very different than animals with a long gestation. Point being, myth is to some degree a medium that makes humans remember in the truest sense. And I don't mean remember as in recall. I literally mean remember, stitch our appendages back upon us. And that's a whole conversation there. But myth is that force. So myth, in some sense, genes and culture as one. Myth maintains the health of the world. There is oxygen to it. Some people today, I think they call this escapism. When they really escape into a story, they feel that oxygen for the first time in our very modern lives. And they, I think, very wrongfully call it escapism because you're not actually escaping, but you're doing the opposite. You're diving into it. You're breathing that oxygen. There's a kind of spirit that lives in myth. And so when we look at, in the modern sense, we look at myth being a lie, that's just a myth, or, the ancient myths are just fun little creative stories for children. And Disney is obviously a massive part of that. In the further, bastardization, if that's a word, bastardization maybe is a better term, of myth into that state of just a very passive, attempt to deconstruct the human species from our ecotone. Because for a myth to be what it is, it has to be grounded there. It has to be in the culture that it arrived from. That's why I start with culture and genes. It has to be nestled in the language of that culture. Because as we speak to our kin, the four-legged, the two-legged, the winged, the vegetative, all of our plants and cousins and all of the other life around us, we speak in a language. That language is what contains that myth. And a good friend of mine, she lives down in North Carolina. She's a shaman and a reader and writer of runes, ancient Scandinavian runes. And she always discusses how, there's this very white European colonial type precedence that when we approach nature and we ask the trees, for wisdom, and we talk to the land and all of this, that we talk to it in the colonial tongue, right? English, right? This is not the tongue of the land, right? So I have a lot of friends, the Asatizakawi, so like the Dakota, the Lakota. I have many friends around the world. A dear friend of mine and sister is a Mokopona of the Waitaha people, like a grandmother of the Maori, if you will, a medicine carrier there. And they speak in that language because the land around them understands that language. And myth, being grounded, has to be nestled both in culture and that language. It's very important. And then last is just the ecotone, right? So myth is grounded in ecotone. That's why it has oxygen. That's why it's nestled at the womb of the world, the hearth. It's told in the winter season. And as we emerge out of that, it's really important as storytellers, as writers, as mythologists, as people who give a damn. I mean, it's a pretty big group of us, that we don't live in an oral telling culture. We don't live in a hearth-based culture. I mean, my family does. We forage for most of our foods and we heat with wood, and most of the winter season we're just nestled around this little fireplace. We sleep there and things like this. And so in my family, it's very real, but for most of us, it's not. And so as we progress into telling stories, and, as I do, I write books and I sell them, and they're printed words, and you hold them, and it's not over my fire, and we're not together, and we're not smoking the same stuff. I'm smoking something different than you're smoking, and, it's different, and we have to approach it from that way. And so it requires the extension of community. And when I say extension, I mean it in the same way that I'm talking about escapism. It's not the running away from, it's not the turning community into something new and something different, but rather the extension of that bridge between where we are and where we've been, between us and our ancestors. And so when I think about myth, I think it's very important to think about it in this way, a two-way dream walking, where in mythology and good oral tellings, in my culture, it's the Seneki, the oral storyteller, the bard, high as kings. I mean, this is a place in culture, a place in our society that we really revere, as high as kingship and monarchy and everything else. Rulers and leaders and warriors, the Seneki, the bard is up there. That soul, if you will, has to perform two-way dream walking, which is not just looking backwards. That's the first way, and dining with our ancestors, right? So looking into our past, looking at our inheritance, genetic, cultural, language, linguistic, kinship, all of these things. This is the reciprocity from the Latin reciprocus, which literally means forward and backward simultaneously. So we look back, we feast with our ancestors. That's looking back. But it's two-way in the sense that we also have to look forward. And as we look forward, we have to pave a pathway for our own feet and for our own generation's futures' feet, our own descendants' feet. I have a good friend. His name is Taylor Keene. I've done a lot of work with him recently. He's an Omaha fellow in the Earth and Bison clan in the Central Plains, Turtle Island, Western Hemisphere. And he always jokes with me. He says, "All of you individuals, you think you know what you think you know the answers, but we've been here for 800 years. They're from the Mississippian culture. So the Omaha Nation, they come from a different area of Turtle Island, a little bit south, a little bit east. Now they're situated in the Great Plains, Omaha, Nebraska, as you can kind of place that on a map." And he says, we've only been here for 800 years. And so when we have questions, we ask the Pawnee, who've been here for 3,000. We don't even know the answers. We don't even know the questions, but they know the questions a little bit better. And so even at 800 years of being grounded in place, the Omaha people, he always jokes, with me, they still barely understand the questions to ask. Mythology, in some sense, is the extension of genetics and culture through this thing that we call space-time, this very material cage of bones, meat suit sort of genetic evolution, where we can keep those stories alive, we can keep those truths alive, we can keep those grounded roots alive. Like, yes, there's composting. Yes, there's decay, both oxidative and biological. These things all happen, but also there's rebirth. The myth is the rewilder, the rememberer of that rebirth, right? And so you can be in place, and when you have questions, you know who to talk to, right? If you're Omaha, you talk to the Pawnee because they've been here for longer. They know these things. And so I think, when you're trying to think about myths and you're thinking about storytelling and you're thinking about lies, the basis of your question, it's really interesting to me that in an age of disconnection, we also have the disconnection That is to say, the forced eradication or separation between humanity and our myths, dubbing them, calling them, determining them as lies. Because it is only there that we are living, if that makes sense. It's only there in the winter season that...
It does to me, because I understand myth. So, that's I think that's one of the core tenets of my wanting to explore this with you. There's a few things I wrote down, but that I'll get into with you here in a moment. But I think I'll state it this way. I interviewed James Carse, who's the author of the book Finite Infinite Games, The Religious Case Against Belief, and some other excellent books, all of which I read. And he was an expert in mythology, professor of theology for 38 years, and a very, very deep, amazing man. And one of the first questions I asked him is, what is a myth? And he said something very profound. He said, Paul, a myth is a story that tells itself. Mm. And so when you think about that in its, shall we say, global or most full context, life is ultimately the story that contains all stories. Mm. So that put me into meditation for quite some time just on who's telling the story of life. Because we're all expressions of characters we're all actors playing leading roles. We have cast, we have crew, we have all the aspects of myth that make a Hollywood movie successful, like Star Wars, in and around us all the time. But the deeper mystery is, how is that story being told? And of course, God is the word for the ultimate storyteller, and I'm not meaning a religious God, because to me that's just the highest power of a belief system. I'm speaking of that which cannot be known, only experienced. God is that for which there is no other. God is the only being that can create and sustain itself. No religious God can do that. So it brings myth into a very profoundly deep mystery, and also in my body, it takes me right into my heart. And there's a vortex, because I'm clairvoyant. So when I look inside of myself as I think these thoughts, I see a vortex, like a wormhole opening up that enters the dimension of timelessness, where there is no time, and there is no name, and there is no face. Mm-hmm. And so I think that when we're really looking at myth, it's not only life being told, it's us being told. But I believe that each of us, as we awaken, can realize our co-creative role, and that we can have agency. And I think this is why Jung's concept of individuation, of not only awakening to your adult responsibilities, be it in a tribe or in a family or in society, but also individuation is the process of marrying the unconscious with the conscious, so that you're less unconscious, and that there's not a gap between the intellect or the ego mind and the unconscious or the dimension of soul. And with that process, as you know, the native tribal people, the elders and the wisest people in the tribe, were the ones that educated the children, and they told them the stories. And they not only told them the stories, but the children were taught to make the costumes and to enact the myths and to memorize the myths of the tribe, so that they knew them inside out and backwards, and that imbued them with the essence of what it meant to be human in that tribal context and in that day, age, and also, as you mentioned, as a fusion with the environment, because one's environment is very, very influential on how they perceive and how they relate. And I also feel it's also important to state that the soul is relationships top to bottom, and we we know that because we referred to our body as ourself. I hurt my hand, or I hurt my hip, or my heart aches. So we see there's a relationship with our body already. And then we have our parents and our friends, our family, our culture, and all of that. You can really feel the complex of the soul as relationship when one has the unfortunate experience of going through a divorce. Because even though you may really feel at some level of your being you aren't compatible with that person anymore, or that you don't love them anymore, there's a period often for about a year where you feel like a big, huge chunk of you is missing. And the longer you've been in that relationship, the longer it takes to heal that. And that shows you the difference between the intellectual appraisal, but the mythic reality of the soul.
If you have listened to even one episode of Paul's podcast before, then you will know that he is passionate, and some would say even fanatical, about the quality of the food he eats and where it is sourced from. That is why the Chek household only eats pasture-raised meat, wild-caught fish, and organic produce. And that is why we subscribe to Wild Pasture's meat delivery service. Each month, Wild Pastures delivers a box of meat that has been raised by family farmers in the USA using regenerative farming practices. 100% grass-fed and finished beef, pasture-raised chicken, and pasture-raised pork, as well as wild-caught seafood. You can customize the selection in your box, add on extra when you know you will be feeding more people, or change your options each and every month. You might be thinking that this will be too expensive for you, but Wild Pasture's mission is to offer the highest quality meat at the lowest prices because they want to transform the meat industry. And that means that more people need to be able to choose meat that is raised right. Their pasture-raised animals are part of a natural ecosystem. Their farmers use rotational grazing, practices that mimic nature, and so do not need to use synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, hormones, or antibiotics. This beautiful process doesn't require the external resources, such as massive amounts of GMO grain, required with environmentally depleting conventional methods. And best of all, the meat and fish taste amazing. And for Paul's listeners, Wild Pastures are offering you 20% off your subscription for life, $15 off your first order, and free shipping. Seriously, you can't find a better deal for top quality pasture-raised meat. Go to wildpastures.com/Paul Chek. You don't need a promo code. Just visit wildpastures.com/Paul Chek and start choosing the goodies you will have delivered to you in your first box.
So I have three other things to share that I want to kind of put on the table with you, but I just want to stop there and see if you have any thoughts on what I've just shared so that I don't go too far ahead.
Appreciate that. No, I have a lot of thoughts. That's beautiful. I wrote a lot of things down. It's the first response I have is dealing with language. I think language is power in the true sense. It's our ability to express those deeper soul relationships. It's always been interesting to me. I'll provide this to you, and very shortly. I studied language, and I have a lot of things to say about it. But I'll provide these two little snippets. Even when you look towards, Creator. In the Great Plains, a lot of the indigenous peoples, especially those who are either nestled within the Sioux or the Asate-Sakawi or derivatives of those nations and cousins of those nations, they have the idea of the great mystery, the Creator God, Lakota, Kantanka, Domaha, Wakanda, right? So very similar linguistics. The interesting thing is, even as you get a little bit more international, a little bit more global, that connection doesn't wither away. And so, for instance, period of my life, I studied ancient Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, and some Middle Eastern languages. And it is interesting because even in the Jewish faith, the word for God, Creator God, in the singular sense is Yod He Vav He, and you don't ever pronounce it. There's no vowel, so it's hard to pronounce anyways, but it's too sacred to say, as you know. But it's the word, Yod He is the verb to be, and vavhe is to some degree the conjugation of that word to mean the past, present, and future idea of being. And so it works out. And then obviously the Christians come in and religion comes in. It does a bunch of stuff to turn it in from Yod He Vav He to Yahweh, from Adonai Eloheinu and everything else. And so it's some degree interesting at its source. And to me, it gets less interesting as you extrude it out. But the interesting thing is Yod He Vav He. And then the Anishinaabe, indigenous peoples of the Great Lakes region, Turtle Island, Western Hemisphere, whose language is comprised of neither nouns or verbs. It's a very unique language. Really, it's an animate language. Robin Wall Kimmerer, Petty Querek, a lot of different authors, Anishinaabe authors write about their language. But it's a language of being and not being, of living and not living, and is not doing and being, but just being, and to some degree. And that is doing. And it's a really interesting way of looking at the world. I wish English was that way. I'm jealous. But in Bodewan Minwen, the language of the Anishinaabe, a particular language of the Anishinaabe, the word for that which is living, right? So just as a tree is living, a human is living, God is living. So all of the things that are living is described Yahweh, Y-A-W-E. A very, very similar word, right? Very similar word. And I'm not saying anything too heavily in towards like a Principia Theologica in the sense where, God revealed himself to one people and that one people began all people. And I don't know, there's a lot of thoughts there, but I'm not even willing to go that far right now. The point is, this language is written into that soul that you talk about, that relationship, that liminal moment where you talk about individuation, when marrying of the conscious and the unconscious, that there's a weft and a warp weave, so a horizontal and vertical weave there, a tapestry well laced by, I think, Creator God. And that language is nestled as a part of that weave. Maybe if a tapestry has colors, that liminal space between the conscious and the unconscious, the marrying between these two things, I think, to some degree is colored not by, reflective light, but by language. I think that's really important. And so one of the interesting things is, as you dive deeper into mythology, you can't truly do that work. It's like shadow work, or it's like medicine work. You can't just do it on the weekends. You have to dive into the language itself. That's really important. So one, I guess that's one response. The second part is this idea of a trickster. A lot of almost all mythologies that I know, a lot of cultures, if not all the cultures that I've studied, especially my own, both Polish and Irish, you have this trickster modality.
Archetype.
The archetype, exactly. And to some degree, the trickster is that which walks between light and dark, between heaven and hell, between good and bad. It's this liminal space on the dark, country back road in rural America where I live, when it's gravel and it's dark and there's nothing else, and you see a shadow flash. It's Bigfoot, it's poison ivy. It's telling you, hey, look, I'm here. Watch out, right? I'm not good, I'm not bad, I'm not leading you in a good way or a bad way. I'm just here to trick. And I'm here to startle. I'm here in that liminal space. And I think that's also really important, especially when it comes into the spirit's journey as a child emerging into or through adolescence, into manhood or womanhood. A lot of cultures, especially Western European cultures and plain cultures, and a lot of other cultures, as well, have this idea of a vision quest, a coming of age. We would call it a passing ceremony, where, as a 7-year-old boy, you start to challenge, what does it mean to be a man, and who is a man, and what does that really look like, and what does it feel like to be fearless, not courageous, fearless, and a warrior. And you start to question the gods and power, right? And that's when society, your culture, kicks you out to the edge of the village. And it says, go meet God, right? Go meet the trickster. And it's always that lone shamanistic hermit at the very edge of the village that lives in the lone hut by himself that says, come here, let me talk to you, right? These are the elders of the village. That's why they're at the edge, because that's where the child goes to meet God, to be reminded in one night, in 4 nights, depending on your culture, that power is in you, but that power is also outside of you. And it's both, balanced in that way. And you emerge into adulthood. And I think a lot of our modern problems, this is a lot of the work we've been doing recently in our community, in our culture here in Central Virginia. It's really looking into those passing ceremonies. I think a lot of the problems we have today, especially as males, I think we lack empathy. I think we lack the eldership. I think we lack a lot of things as males. We lack the stories. I think stories presenting malehood in a positive light has been lacking, just like feminine. I mean, I just can talk from my own perspective. But I think the passing ceremony, I think, is so lacking in today. And that's what mythology does really well. It presents you not in story form, but in life form, living form. It's living and breathing, and it's actually rooted like your feet are rooted. And it allows you to be carried through the stages of your life, just like your life is carried through stages of your life. And allows you in those moments, like you said, to look past those physical material stages into the divine, the eternal, the star entity that we all come from, right? The liminal in the truest sense. So,
yeah, it's interesting. I've got a really deep, profound book. I can't remember the author's name right now because it's a very long, unusual name. But I just happened to come across an old interview with him with Jeffrey Mishlove on the New Thinking Aloud. And I believe the interview was from like 1995. And the book's titled Myth as Body, and it's unbelievably deep. And this guy, his first name's Joe, if I remember right, but I was amazed. The interview was fantastic, but then when I got the book and started to study it, I mean, his knowledge of the anatomy and physiology of the human being and the cranial nerves, and I mean, it was like I was reading a book by a very, very skilled expert in rehabilitation, or someone that really knew the anatomy as well as I do as a skilled rehab professional. But he gave example after example, chapter after chapter, to show how myth actually emerges out of our bodies.
Yeah.
And I'll share something from his book to give an example. He references the koan, what is the sound of one hand clapping? And, many people come up with all sorts of, intellectual things, which a Zen master will just blow you off and say, no, keep going. And the koan is designed to be unanswerable by the intellect. It has to, you can't really come up with an acceptable answer for a Zen master with an intellectual answer, because the whole point of the koan is to collapse the intellectual mind, to burn it out to where it just lays down, gives up, and it opens you up to intuition, or the place beyond mind, the dreaming nature, if you will. And so what the author says to do to hear the sound of one hand clapping, he says, just sit very, very quietly and listen inside of yourself, and you can hear there's a background hum. And he says the sound of one hand clapping is the sound of creation moving through your nervous system. And that is the sound that you hear in your acoustic nerve of all your cells living and breathing and creating this network of interaction, which is, you can hear it. And I mean, I can hear it easily if I just listen inside. So what he's describing is that is the sound of one hand clapping. And then when we speak, act, move, create, that's the other hand. And so then we have our co-creative agency working with, shall we say, the origin myth, which would be very much like the Hindu conception of Om. Ah, I awaken. Ooh, I'm dreaming. I'm falling asleep. Underscore, end of cycle, rebirth, recreation. So I just wanted to share that because the book, and if you're interested, I can get you the exact title, but it's a very big book. I mean, it's probably 300 pages of really deep exploration of myth, and I was blown away because I have studied a lot of body myth concepts and books and authors over the years, but this one was just like way out there. And I don't mean out there in the negative sense. I mean, this was like a very, very thorough book. And he's actually a playwright, which I thought even more interesting. I'm like, wow, this guy is, this is like Shakespeare level depth.
Wow.
The other thought that came to me is when we're relating like native people, excuse me, as native people so often did, and I have these abilities, I know you do too, and I know it was obvious reading your book. Like, it's very natural for me to talk to plants and trees and to the spirit of the land, and I'm clairvoyant, so I can see nature spirits and house spirits and fairies and elementals, and I just feel sad that others don't have that ability, because they would realize there's way more magic going on, and they'd be a lot more reverent of life. Things wouldn't just be objects that they just chop down and thought were theirs for whatever they want to do with. You know, they would be much more in tune with the fabric of life from which we emerge. But we have, in what is classically called the junk DNA, as you know, we have some relationship to pretty much everything there is in the entire kingdom, from the first single-celled organisms all the way to everything that's alive, be it a fruit fly or a daffodil or a banana or whatever. And my experience is that in my deep explorations, that genes are actually a cosmic antenna system that taps us into multi-dimensions, but all the dimensions in which life emerge. But also we have an unconscious. We have a personal unconscious. We're part of a collective unconscious, the collective unconscious of the earth, which contains the experience and memory of everything that's ever happened on the planet, which is embedded in the solar unconscious, which is embedded in the galactic, which is embedded in the universal, all of which are the same ocean. And the self rises up out of that emotion, or out of that ocean of the unconscious, to become self-aware, so that there can be consciousness within the universe, and it can have self-reference and know itself. And I think that, you know, when, for example, you know, the natives have a long history of using mushrooms and various plant medicines and ceremonies, and that was the domain of shaman and sometimes medicine men and women. And I think one of the things that those things gave us was a sacred chance to disable the ego structure, to bring us back into awareness of the living kin in and around us in the environment, and to disable or to perforate the danger of the ego's sense of self as separate from. And so I think that a lot of us have gotten so trapped in the intellect or the ego, and we see all this problems with suicide today, and anxiety and depression, and existential angst, and you know all the things that can be healed through being grounded in a living myth, and through these sacred practices that were used. So my point there is, I think that, and Gene Gebser describes this very well in his stages of conscious evolution, which go from archaic to magic to mythic to mental rational, and his model, we're now coming into the integral stage, which, without reviewing those stages in depth, he's very clear that if you transcend any stage of conscious evolution without including the levels below, that you're going to create a lot of problems for yourself. Mm. And so here we are in the mental rational, but we've lost touch with the mythical. We've lost touch with the magical, which was the period of time largely before language. In fact, art in caves and on stones from that period of time often most commonly depicted human beings without a mouth. They only started showing mouths in their art when the mythic stage began, and we began telling stories orally. But once we get to the mental rational, if we've lost the mythic and we've lost the magic stage, which is when we were in a fusion with nature, living like animals were our brothers and sisters, not other, and plants were also our family, and the soil and the water and the elements were our family, and then you go below that to the archaic, which is the fabric of earth at its very beginning, then what happens is you start worshiping ideas as more real than the stories and the relationships and the foundation of our very, very life. And when that merges into the integral stage, he describes how time and space become diaphanous, they become semi-transparent, and that people can become very, very confused because there's so much convergence in their psyche at any given moment. And it's like the firewall of the ego is beginning to break down, because we are potentially, he doesn't say this, but we're as the earth is moving with the sun and the solar system, many speak of how there's different vibrational dimensions in space, and that we're actually, and when we know we go through the 12 signs of the zodiac, and each of those has very distinct qualities to it, which astrologers have known for thousands and thousands of years. And so here we are coming into the age of Aquarius, and I see all the symptoms coming on of the very integral stage that Gebser talked about. So what do we see? We see AI. We see people having massive amounts of information. We see a third psychedelic revival where people are now rushing out and without being grounded even in the rational, let alone the mythical, the magic, and the archaic. They're disabling their ego, but they don't have an anchor. They don't have a circle of wise elders to hold them, to stabilize them. And so now we've got so many things happening at once. We've got government doing crazy shit. We've got, COVID. We've got, we're all being taught to believe that we're all dangerous and they have to spy on all of us, and we're spending our money on making each other the enemy. And then we got the attempt to merge into a one world government and a unifying digital currency that turns us into a prison planet. We've got an unfolding of extraterrestrial concepts and the outpouring of people having experiences with extraterrestrial beings. And without finishing the list, you see, like, we're now like coming into a place where our conscious minds are starting to interact with what I would call multidimensional realities, where in our development, we were very focused on our immediate self and our immediate environment, because you had to focus on that. And you had to be aware of our place in the circle of life so that you didn't destroy your own sustainability and your own future for your children. And of course, native tribes were always concerned about 7 generations ahead, because they were very, very aware of the realities of hunting things out and burning things out. I mean, there was a time when people were using so much firewood, they would literally eliminate forests for firewood. And so I bring these points up because if we don't find a way back to a real mythological underpinning, which is now being used by Disney and corporations to commandeer people's minds and program them into transhumanism, into sexual confusion, into family destruction, into social destruction. They're using, as you know, all the hallmarks of brainwashing. COVID was a perfect example. So what's happening is our mythical architecture, if you will, our mythical underpinnings are now being hijacked by people and used in ways that are completely and utterly contradictory. So it's almost like the trickster has now embodied itself so thoroughly that if we don't wake up to what the trickster in alchemy is called Mercurius, and in Greek it's called Hermes, which is the god of liminal spaces, the god of doorways, the god of walls, the god of anything you can't see behind, but you know something's there. I think what I'm saying, and I think you understand me, of all people, that we're really in a very, very dangerous place for anyone that understands myth, because we are detaching with the source of deep knowledge that is essential. It's essential for the same reason that you had to have a mythological underpinning for a young man before you taught him how to kill with a bow and arrow, an axe, or a weapon that he might have to use in a battlefield or for his own survival. You know, you can't just give an 8-year-old a bow and arrow and say, go have fun, because it won't be an hour before one of his friends is dead, right? And so now we give them iPhones and they're more dangerous.
Yep.
So if we don't, and this is one of the things, Daniel, that I want to share with you. Reading your book, I actually felt a deep sense of gratitude for your presence on the planet, because I've read a lot of books in my life, and I'm a pretty well-studied guy. And I think, especially for a man with white skin, you're actually conveying the essence of myth in your writings in a way that's very, very unusual. So with that level of myth living in you and breathing through you and animating you, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what I've just shared. Enzymes are one of the most important things we can use to supplement our diet. Very few people have normal levels of digestive enzymes. It's extremely common to be digestive enzyme deficient because so many people are eating cooked foods, processed foods, packaged foods, etc. The best digestive enzymes I've ever found are mastzymes by bioptimizers. And one of the things I like about them is not only are they the most advanced technology for how they're produced, the science behind them, but I take them on an empty stomach every morning and every night as proteolytic enzymes to help clean my body. So I've got Wade here, who's the formulator of these enzymes, to tell us how do they work as digestive and proteolytic enzymes, because today I think we really need to be supplementing with high quality enzymes. So Wade, what's unique about mastzymes?
Well, one of the interesting things is undigested protein is one of the biggest contaminants that cause problem for people, whether it's in their blood or inflammatory conditions, or even impairing recovery. And it's quite common amongst athletes who have high protein diets, interesting enough, who are looking to add recovery, but they're not breaking down their protein effectively. And that was my case way back in the day as a former bodybuilding champion. So we set about cultivating and developing an enzyme formulation that handled all of the amino acids in a pH range from 2 to 12, as well as providing an assortment of assistant enzymes. In other words, it doesn't just break down protein, it handles carbohydrates, it handles fats, it handles fibers, a variety of different things, and they work synergistically together to make sure that you can break down just about any food and digest it properly. Now, when you talk about the difference between enzymes, there's digestive enzymes and systemic enzymes. Systemic enzymes such as like nattokinase or serrapeptase. Well, they don't help break down digestion, but they can break down inflammation or inflammatory conditions, undigested proteins, or scarring tissue inside the body. Well, it turns out when you take mastzymes on an empty stomach, it works exactly the same way. It will go into the bloodstream and now works as a systemic enzyme, reducing inflammation, accelerating recovery times. Matt just tore his Achilles tendon and made a full recovery after surgery within a few weeks, which they expected for many months. He was taking as many as 100 a day. Now, I'm not suggesting people do that, but this was an extreme condition. And the bottom line is mastzymes is great for recovery, for cleaning up undigested proteins in the system, as well for digesting just about any meal. If this isn't the best digestive enzyme or systemic enzyme that you've ever taken, you get your money back. That's the Bioptimizer guarantee.
Spirit Gym with Paul Chek listeners can get 10% off their purchase of mastzymes by going to bioptimizers.com/Spirit Gym and use the code PAUL10 at checkout. You can choose from 3 different sizes, and in addition, Bioptimizers always have special bonus gifts and additional savings when you get multiple bottles. So go to bioptimizers.com/Spirit Gym and use the code PAUL10 to check out mastzymes with 10% off.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Your comment of the bow and arrow, my son, he's 5, Weymouth Tecumseh is his name, and he hunts with the longbow, and he's very good at it. But I will tell you, yes, you are right. 1 hour of unsupervised time and something is coming back dead. That shouldn't be dead. Young boys have a way with things. Yeah, he's awesome. No, I have a lot of thoughts. I was trying to write them down as you went, but then I got enraptured by some of the complexities and beauties of your words. And so I'll respond the best way I possibly can. I think, number one, going to medicines and mushrooms and plants and connectors, bridgers, if you will, from our modern moment to the moment that is modern all around us. Just we fail in the modern way to see it, is to maybe see through the malaise, the fog, the morass of our own making, civilized industry. capitalism, like you were describing, all of these things. I think it's also true for blood. And I realize that's a little bit strong of a statement. But a lot of our work, my wife and I, over the last couple of years, we lead what we call sacred harvests, where we bring a lot of people out to the agricultural landscape. And we go through a 4-day hunt where we commune with the animals. They're open grazing 400, 500, 600 acres at a time. And we do ceremony with the animals, and we meet the animal that's going to be taken, and we ask permission. And it's interesting. We do these hunts where people, we did a hunt about a month ago, and we had people from Western Canada. I had people from Chile flying in, from Southern Florida. I had people from San Diego. I've had people from Germany, Spain, Portugal. I've had a lot of people fly in for these events, for these ceremonies. We call them sacred ceremonies. And there's no medicine in the popular sense. There's no mushrooms, there's no plants, there's nothing else. We have a very particular ceremony that we do. And we've had these events where people come in, and on the 4th day, when we're supposed to partake in the harvest, to hunt the animal, whatever that animal is. Wild, domestic, doesn't matter. Around here, they're all about the same. And the animal says no. And literally everybody flies back to their corner of the world, Germany, Canada, the western side of the Western Hemisphere. And there's no blood. It's not for today, right? It's a very interesting thing that we get to participate in. And that's really powerful. But I tell this story because in addition to that, really in the antithesis of that, the opposite, the back end, the dark side of that, we've obviously been able to harvest. The acceptance was given. And I'll share a couple quick little stories. One gentleman, after participating in a harvest, covered in blood. When I say covered, I mean like 100 gallons of blood, just literally all over you. That's just the best way to do it. It's the cleanest way to do it. It's the most healthy way to do it for the animal, for the human, for the soil, and everything in between. There's a whole structure that surrounds the ceremony too, and it's neither here nor there for this conversation. But he's covered in blood, and he's crying and weeping, and he's dancing and he's wailing. This very modern man lives in a city, I think even in a condominium in Northern Virginia, and just lives a modern white-collar type, business. I think he's a software developer life. And it was the first moment where he met himself. And it was the first moment that he met mother as mother, not like mother. And I think that's a huge difference that was given to me by a pipe carrier, Lala Lakota pipe carrier friend of mine, brother and mentor. Until we love mother as mother, not like mother, we cannot proceed. And it was the first moment that he met mother. Not like, but mother itself. And he looked at me and he was wailing, literally wailing. I've never really found the words to describe it other than just screaming, but not negative. And he said, I met the divine and I know it. It's good now. Nothing I've ever done is like this. I've had people. One of the individuals just 2 months ago came out, little family, and the wife had done multiple tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, and she was a helicopter machine gunnist. I don't know the proper term. And so if you could just see her life, multiple tours in a helicopter, a Black Hawk on a machine gun, just pelting life, right? Just nestled in that pelting, very mechanical, very industrial, maybe negative, maybe not. That's for her and her life story, I guess, but just very rough and rugged. And we went through a harvest, and she looked at me and she said, and she was shaking, her hand was shaking like this. And she said, I've done medicine ceremonies. I've done ayahuasca. I've done the frog thing, which I can never remember the name of. I've done 4-day, thank you. I've done the 4-day isolation, darkness chambers. I've done a lot of shot, machine guns out of airplanes and helicopters in foreign countries and war. And I've been in a helicopter that was downed. I was literally shot out of the sky. And I have never felt this way. I have never felt this adrenaline. I have never felt this connection. I have never felt these feelings. And then, that was the end of it. And I'm not saying that this supersedes any medicine. What I'm saying is that what we often fail to really recognize, what we neglect so very often is what mythology bears so well, which is blood, realness, intimacy in the truest, wettest, moistest, soggiest, muckiest, collagenous sense. Blood in the truest way. And I think that's really important, especially as you were talking about the hunter-gatherer lives that surrounded them. These stories and our ancestors in the 7 generations. Life was hard. It was also beautiful. Blood is hard. It is also beautiful. I always talk about when we do our ceremonies that blood is like grief and blood is like glitter. It's hard to wash away. You will smell like blood for days. When you really cover yourself in blood, not in any way outrageous. You just get covered in blood in the hunting process. There's no way around it. You can't wash it off. It's there, and you have to deal with it. It's that grief that has to be dealt with, and it's that trauma in the truest sense, not the generational sense, that has to be acknowledged before it can be handled and maybe dissipated or met or warred with or released. It has to be acknowledged. And I think the blood is a really interesting way to look at that. And then when you look at mythology, so not field harvesting and hunting and being covered in the literal blood, but mythology in more of a theoretical blood, you see the hearth, you see the womb, you see the winter season, and all of a sudden the aroma of the ecotone begins to enter the story. And so when you're reading mythology and you're writing mythology, or you're giving an oral telling at a fire, and it's winter and it's dark at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock p.m., and the fire is warm and it's whistling and bustling and cold of a blizzard outside, and it's white outside, yet it's yellow inside, and the hearth fire is literally flickering or reflecting off of all of the faces, and there's shadows, and then the teller stands and he looks at you, or she looks at you, and he says, a long time ago, or way back when, or anything that takes you from the modern moment, right? That is the point of the hearth fire. That's the point of the womb. That's the point of extending the genes in this culture from the liminal to the unliminal, like you're saying, from the stars and the heavens and the galaxies and all of that space to the material down here and rising up to meet it. It's the bridge, it's life, it's oxygen, right? Which is, again, why the hearth fire needs oxygen. Myths need oxygen. The oxygen is the force of bodies, interacting with that myth. And that's another, so I can talk in this way for a long time. I want to get to your next question, but I want to say this first. I think that's a really hard thing to find in the modern way, that oxygen, because oxygen is living and it's changing, and the bodies surrounding that, the life forms, regardless if they're made out of wood and trees or made out of, meat and carbon and fungi and bacteria like humans, the oxygen, the bodies that surround that oxygen changes the oxygen. They're living. The oxygen becomes alive and it becomes different. If you're breathing and I'm breathing, the oxygen is going to be different around us, as opposed to if my wife and I are breathing in the same room. It's going to be different. And so the aroma matters, the ecotone matters, the hearth matters, the type of wood matters, the color of the flame matters, the season matters, the light outside matters, the light inside matters, the people around the fire matter. Everything affects the story being told. No story ever told orally will ever be the same. But when we write books and we put it on paper, like the one I have in front of me, or the ones that surround you and I's entire lives, we both read so much, nothing is living there, right? It's very difficult to write a book that's still living. Very difficult, right? You type, and it goes on the ink on page, and then it gets printed, and you hold it, and I hold it, and even if I change mine, I can't change yours, and so there's a disconnect there. And so one of the works of my life is to try to find a way to write, to craft story in a way that should be read over hearth fire, not underneath unnatural light in bed as you're just going through escapism, romantasy or fantasy or science fiction or something like this. Although those have their places, that's not my place. How do we keep that oral, living ecotone alive in a bastardized medium of the written word?
I think, having been raised on a farm and had to deal with the trauma of becoming very good friends with pigs and animals that I raised from birth, only then to have to hold them so my father could castrate them or kill them and gut them. And one minute I was petting them, the next minute they were in the frying pan. And I know exactly what you mean about blood. When I was 15, one of my friend's fathers was a butcher, and it was every hunting season they needed help dressing animals because all the hunters would just bring them and drop them off. So I would make money by gutting and skinning deer and elk and moose. And so I know the smell, I know the feel. On our farm was a 142-acre working farm with 120 sheep, I think 5 or 6 milking cows, a bunch of goats, about 50 chickens, horses. So that in an environment like that, there's a constant interchange of life and death, birth and death. It's always going, and I remember, like, prior to that, we had a pig farm as well, with over 100 pigs. And I remember as a child first being born in LA, and then my mother meeting my stepfather and And then my life shifting from Los Angeles to the kind of down in the dirt reality of a farm, and just how I kind of went through periods of, I guess, shock of like, oh my God, like I've got to kill my friend, and the point I'm making is, and this is why I encourage people all the time, you need to go spend some time on a farm. You need to go spend time in nature with your feet touching the earth. You need to lay next to a stream and just empty yourself and listen, because there's a language being spoken that you've forgotten about. You need to participate in a slaughter, because one thing that happens in my experience, if you overeat, you'll eat less after you participate in a slaughter, because you'll realize that you're participating in something sacred, and that to overconsume just for eating is to actually be a force of death, and it's disrespectful. And if you undereat, you will begin to take care of yourself, because you'll realize that life and your body are sacred. So I think participating in a slaughter actually has a very powerful effect on the psyche, and it brings it into a balancing relationship. Earlier, you were talking about the different names for God, and you progressed up to Yahweh. And it's interesting because I read a fantastic book called When God Was a Woman by Merlin Stone, which is an excellent book I think everybody should read. But she breaks down Yahweh quite thoroughly in there, and she says the actual meaning of Yahweh is ever flowing. And she makes the correlation to how many times in the Bible that Yahweh was speaking about things, and that if you look at the environment that it's in, it's on a mountain with all the indications of volcanic activity. And so she thinks that the reason the word Yahweh ended up in the Bible is because it actually symbolizes that which is ever flowing, like a river or a volcano or life itself, which is just a side note I wanted to share with you, other than the fact that the book When God Was a Woman by Merlin Stone, which I believe you can get on audio as well. And it's also a very shocking expose that would certainly make any woman question Christianity as a path, because of its torture to women and disrespect for women.
Yeah. Can I jump in right?
Oh, please do. Yeah.
Can I stop your thoughts? That's interesting. Yeah, it's very easy to get certain religions mad. I realize that, and I don't intend it. Although at the same time, maybe I do. During like I said, a period of my life, I was wanting to study biblical Hebrew, because I was raised in a Christian household and I had a lot of questions, and I wanted to go through a period of self-study where I don't know. I think there's a lot of politicalization of a lot of religious movements, and I was done with it, and I wanted some answers, and I thought maybe I can find them on my own. This is not my current path, but it was a path I walked in the moment. And it's interesting, the beginning of Genesis, if you read it in the biblical Hebrew, and I don't know if I can quote it verbatim, but thinking about that book, When God Was a Woman or When God Was a Goddess, whatever the title is, the Bible and the Torah, the Old Testament, it begins, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'et ha'eretz hitatohu bohu, which is basically when the gods began this creation, and it was formless and void, maybe. It was welter and waste, maybe is another definition of that translation. But the interesting part is it says, V'hoshek al panei tehom va'rurak Elohim marach hapet al panei chamayim. And the va'rurak Elohim is literally va, feminine, ruach, breath, Elohim, gods, lowercase gods. And that in the truest sense, in the original sense, in the oldest sense, even according to the Bible, which Christians would string me up at this moment. So I'm not talking about that, but from the oldest sense of what this text is really trying to say, it's the feminine breath of the gods is what floated over the waters. And so even in the Bible, you have Varuach Elohim, not the patriarchal God who, spoke and was, right? Not the master God, but the feminine breath of God. Elohim could be translated many different ways. I get that. A lot of debate over the last 6,000 years has been spent to why it's Elohim, not Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh or Adonai Eloheinu, like the singular God. Why does it have to be multiple gods? There's a lot of going on there. But the thing that's never contested is Va-Urak, the feminine breath of creator, God, goddesses, whatever that is. That can be debated. Who cares about that?
Yeah.
And that is life-changing. Or even in the English, I'm sorry, I'll say this one last thing and I'll let you continue on because I can go off.
No, it's all good. I think
Hebrew.
this is all important.
Cool. Like Eve, when it comes down to it, Eve, the first quote-unquote woman of the Old Testament, her real name is Chava, which means breath, right? Giver of breath, holder of breath, right? And so even from that sense, Eve is the second creation or second creator, if that makes sense. And so you have that divine feminine inherent and implicit into the beginning of Genesis. You have the creative breath of God creating it, and then you have the first breath of woman, ergo creating the rest of it. And so you have that multi-layered creation story just in the two names, Vadorak and Kavah. And then you get into the very first story of Genesis post-creation, which is Cain and Abel. Cain, the original word is Caim, which means tiller, turner of the soil, struggler, right? Survivor. Not necessarily agricultural. We didn't have agriculture at the time. It's a huge misnomer. But anyways, the point being, turner of the soil, somebody who works and toils. Maybe toil is a fine word, Caim. But Abel is not named Abel, of course. His name, that's an I can never pronounce that word. An English version, anglicized, there it is, version of
Anglo-Saxon.
Thank you, yeah. And his name is not Abel, but Havel, which is the ethereal end of sightless smoke. You can translate it. And so it's not the fire, it's not the smoke you can see, but it's the wisping curl, silver gauze of smoke as it turns into nothing. That's what Havel is, right? And that's who the Bible, obviously, in the story of Cain and Abel, supports. That's, in terms of ceremony and sacrifice and everything else. And who cares for the rest of the story? I don't mean to get too nestled into it. But even from a naming perspective, it's Havel. So in the very beginning is Vadorak, that's who creates the feminine breath of God. The second is the Kava, the breath, who creates the rest of the world, divine feminine through and through. And that Havel is nameless. It's not male or female. He's neither celebrated nor mourned when he's born. He's just a curling wisp of gray smoke as it trails off into the atmosphere, i.e., the Spirit of God, the breath of God.
Yeah, exactly.
And you lose all of that, in my opinion. You lose all of that when you read the Bible in English or Koine Greek and all of these other things. But the idea of a divine feminine, in 2013, I was an archaeologist, or really was studying to be an archaeologist. I always wanted to be an archaeologist until I was diagnosed with hell on earth, basically, and had to go other ways. But in 2013, I lived in the Dordogne region of France, studying Paleolithic and Mesolithic cave art. So in Lascaux, Grand Rock, Las Cabrielles. And for a period of many, many, many months, we partnered with this graduate program, a biomedical engineering program, Honoré, I think it was called, in Nantes, France, to work through the early evolution history of cave art and Homo sapiens as we emerged out of the Homo sapien, Homo neanderthalis migration belt or integration belt, where we interbred, created the art. But even in these ancient sites, you don't not see the idea of the feminine. You were talking about cave art earlier with mouths, and it's entirely true. I completely agree with, in my own research and my own time in these caves, studying these caves, doing archaeology in these caves. In some sense, it's a calendar of rutting. A lot of times you see this, right? It's a reproductive calendar that's being painted on these Western European walls about 35 to 45,000 years ago. A lot of them are either male in a rutting coat or all female, always female, right? Because that's what we're looking as a co-creative species. And the interesting thing is, even in mythology, as we come into the modern storytelling way, out of 45,000-year-old cave paintings, but you get into it in the modern way, it's the females in mythology that are most interesting. I don't know a more intellectual way to say that, but even in my own book, The Plane of Pillars, which you were talking about earlier, the main character is really threefold. There's a horse, there's a girl, and there's an old woman. And to spoil it, the old woman is the girl, I guess. But the girl is three girls in one. She's the feminine goddess Maka, who is the white horse, the thunder goddess to some degree in the Irish pantheon. She's also Banba. I'm sorry, not Banba, Bav, who is the crow, raven, liminal trickster walker. And then she's also the Morrigan, which is a conversation all to itself. To some degree, she's the goddess of the Irish peoples, and that's all kind of mashed all into this one person, as in the Morrigu, and it's feminine, or like, we can talk about the different ceremonies of the Irish calendar, but just looking at it, the beginning of the year is Samhain, which is run by the dark period when the Pleiades star cluster rises into the night sky at the beginning of November. We call it the Pleiades star cluster, we call it the Droilen, the Wren, which has its own mythology and its own stories that might be interesting later, may not. And we celebrate that at Samhain, the birth of the year into darkness, because all life begins in that darkness, in that womb. And the winter season, really the late autumnal season in the winter season, is the birth of the year, first through the womb of the feminine, the great feminine. And we celebrate goddesses like the Dagda, and we celebrate the three sovereignty goddesses, Iru, Badba, and Fanla, and we celebrate the Kolyak, the winter hag, if you will, that runs, and she's water. Very important. She symbolizes water during that winter period. And then we arise in May. We celebrate May Day today, the bastardization of a very Western European and definitely Celtic and definitely, particularly Irish celebration of Beltane, the two fires, where the Pleiades or the Droilen star cluster rises into the daytime sky. The masculine, the year begins, and we go through that period of listening and sitting and fighting and remembering. And then we go into the winter season telling the stories again. And it's that biurnal year we talk about, with many quarters during it all, with Lunasa and Ostara and every other ceremony that we practice. But you have the moon and the sun, right? The sun is masculine, the moon is feminine, at least in our culture. And it's the moon that creates the earth, not the sun, at least, again, in our culture. And you see the same thing, and I think you see it in biblical Hebrew, not in any modern way. I don't mean to insult either Christians or Jews in that, but in the ancient sense, in the original language sense, as it was birthed and given to us 7,000 years ago.
Whether you're a fitness professional, healthcare specialist, or just a regular human being, I'm sure you've seen this. Someone who seems to be training hard and eating right, and yet they still can't shift those excess pounds, build muscle, or make progress on their health goals. It's like they're trapped in a hamster's wheel, running on the spot and getting nowhere, stuck in their stress, pain, and bewilderment about why they're not getting the results they think they should. The problem? Most people are only considering one or two aspects of health and wellness, and yet the human body is a complex system of systems. That's why the Chek Institute created the Chek Academy, a complete education in holistic health, exercise, and lifestyle coaching. If you're ready to make the leap into a new career, or perhaps seeking more advanced skills to enhance your current work, the Chek Academy is the path. In year 1, you'll go deep into holistic lifestyle coaching level 1, integrated movement science level 1, our new scientific core conditioning course, and much more, learning how to really help yourself and others thrive. You can study from your own home or join the Chek faculty at locations around the world for a combination of online and in-person courses. Enrollment is open now, but spaces are limited and the spots do fill up quickly. Head to chek.group/Chek Academy and submit your application before September the 30th. That's chek.group/CHEK Academy.
I interrupted you, though, because you were working through goddesses as a female. I'm sorry, God as female, about that book.
Yeah, well, I love all this stuff. I think it's important for us to have opportunities like this to reground ourselves in our mythical roots, our biological roots in the earth, and our relationship to the earth and the sun and the cosmos. These are things that are like, most young people today would be clueless to these things. But really, that would be like, for me, it's like being a tree that doesn't know it has roots and can't figure out why it keeps falling over, Yeah. And those stories and those experiences are actually what puts life into context, which is essential for meaning making. If you don't have meaning, spirit essentially becomes castrated. It stops flowing. And the way I describe this to my students is certainly you've had experiences where, for whatever reason, you had to do a job, but it was meaningless to you. And what happened to your esprit de corps? What happened to your desire to do good work?
Right.
It goes.
Right.
And so what we have today is a world full of people that are just limping along. I mean, the amount of times, for example, we've had people come out here to work for us to fix refrigerators or fences or concrete, and there's just no quality of workmanship at all, and things aren't getting done. And you just watch how people are kind of passively floating along in life, doing the bare minimum because there's no heart involved. And I think, you know, as a guy who's been a therapist for a very long time and looked deeply into myself and into life and into people, I mean, I can see a radical difference from when I was a child and how I was raised on a farm, and what was instilled into me is very important. For example, in my family, it was a very clearly defined rule. The first thing you do when you wake up is you go feed, water, and take care of animals. My father made it clear, if you were caught eating before those animals were taken care of, something would happen that you would never, ever forget. And that was definitely something he meant. And so what you see is right there, there's a statement from my father that you must support, protect, clean, feed, nurture, and protect the life that gives you life. Because if you get it backwards, it won't work out well. And every farmer has to confront that reality every day. And because people now just think money comes out of a hole in the wall at a shopping mall and that food just forever just lands on the shelf, they don't even have a clue what they're eating or where it's coming from or what the ecological impact of it is. Yeah. And these are all things that track right back to, if they have myths, they're detached from reality. And so we have to reground ourselves while we still can. And that leads me to ask you, Daniel, what do you think the myth that people at large are living today is, humanity is living? If you had to describe the myth people are living today, what would you describe that as?
It's a really good question. As I think through my answer, I'll say this. When you were talking, myths as meaning to remember, I think the thing that I think about most is a silence with legs. That's the good myth. That's not an answer to your question. Myth provides us a silence with legs. And I think that can be unpacked for many hours. Mm-hmm. I just wrote a book on the subject. It'll come out next year. But I think it's the truest thing that I've found yet in the writing of that myth, if you will. A silence with legs. That's what it means to remember. It's not to fight, but it's to be silent enough, to remember enough, and then have legs to do something. It's an interesting thought. But myths as meaning brought me to that. In terms of the modern myth, I think there's a lot of ways you can go about it. Disassociation is a term that's a little bit too big, maybe a little bit too pregnant for my usage here. Mm-hmm. But I think it's apt for the moment. It's what came to me. Yeah. When we lead these harvests, the first thing we do when everybody arrives, and there's people that we have to pick up from every airport imaginable. I mean, we don't even know each other yet. We haven't done any ceremonies together. We don't even know each other's names or what the land looks like in them or around them. And the first thing we do is we go meet the animals. And it's sometimes a 1, 2, 3 mile walk, and sometimes it takes a little bit of hunting because, as I said, around here, animals really aren't that domestic. You can get within maybe 25 yards of them before they're out. Very much like deer, elk, or wild bison or something. And so we walk 1, 2, 3 miles, and we don't really know each other yet, and small conversations are happening. And then we find the animal that we intend to harvest. We have not yet formed a relationship. We have not yet started the bond of communication, the honorable harvest, as Robert Walkemer, dubs it. I think it's a really, really wonderful way of looking at it, that honorable, consensual harvest where you can take or not take, and that's given to you. It's a gift. It's not a right. It's a gift. And we stand there in silence, like you're saying, listening to that clapping that you were talking about earlier, that humming, that thrumming inside of you of all creation, just booming, ready for that reciprocal backwards and forwards at the same time, that Latin reciprocus, the clap to come through. I love that. And everybody has to immediately start to taste in their mouth that for them to live, that being that stands before them must die. And it's a huge moment of realization. We've had people leave after this. We've had people cry. We've had people say that moment of realization, that moment of connection, actual unity, not community as talismanic ways of trying to gather as humans or rituals and some sort of religious ceremony or rite that you were handed in some sort of political structure. I mean connection. I mean actual intimacy as unity, as two becoming one in the serious and most sincere sense. Because you have to rationalize at that moment. You have to cognitize something that is very subconscious in us. You have to pull it up into the conscious, that in order for you to live, this must die, and it must die before or by your hands. And it's going to have pain so that you can have pleasure in the truest sense, not pleasure in any sort of ethereal or carnal sense. I mean pleasure in the truest, spiritual, most eternal sense. It must have pain so we can have pleasure. So that one day we have pain and it has pleasure. It's all reciprocal. But for the moment, this is the stage in which we're at. And it changes people, right? So that disconnection, the dismemberment, the myth of today, I think, is that we can use technological devices without really even considering the downstream ramifications of the silent ones. I mean, this is colonialism, this is imperialism, that we can look here and not actually see the thing over there. That you look at an English empire. And as an Irish person, or as a descendant of Irish immigrants, I love the joke where there's this meme where an Irish person is like, oh, so, England won World War II, the Allied powers, and they beat Hitler and things. And he's like, oh, that's great. Like, so Winston defended England and is like the savior of the world, like Winston Churchill. And the guy's like, yeah. And he's like, England's Winston? Like that Winston? And he's like, yeah. And so the point is, you can praise the man, but you can blame the empire, and to some degree, that's very inapt. It's not exactly proper. Colonialism and imperialism allows us to look at a beautiful thing and not realize the negativity surrounding it.
Yeah,
that is to say, the great mind of Winston Churchill, but not the great demoralizing and genocidal power of the English empire.
The Twin Towers.
Everything. The Twin Towers to what's happening on the east side of the Mediterranean as we speak, to all over the world and all over time. It's implicit to human experience that there's darkness, and sometimes the darkness has no light at all, and it doesn't even have true darkness. It's just this evil place, and so that disconnection, that we can use technology without looking at the downstream ramifications, or we can use technology to separate, or we can use mechanized industry to create something in the landscape without even understanding the downstream ramifications. Or myself, I was in a conversation with a gentleman yesterday, and I realize this is a hard stand, but as somebody who's suffered on the brink of death for the last 15 years with my own health struggles, and I mean every word of that literally, chemicals, modern agricultural, and just general public chemicals is something that's very strong to me. I'm looking out the window. There's a mockingbird like 5 feet from my window, losing my train of thought. But chemicals mean a lot to me. And I said, listen, a lot of my problems are due to chemicals in the environment. Let's say glyphosate. Yeah. It's an easy one to pick on. Paraquat 2,4-D, Grazon. I don't care. Pesticides. The number one place of pesticides usage in the United States is at youth sporting fields and public school systems.
And golf courses.
And golf courses. I think golf courses is second to those two. And so, like, our children are going to school steeped in pesticides and glyphosate. I mean, this is an insane reality. And they were like, well, the agriculture system depends upon glyphosate. You can't just change it in a day. I said, no, but we can change the law. If you're going to continue to kill me, then I can kill you. So we either have to outlaw glyphosate or outlaw murder. But you have to pick one. You can't have both. You can't kill me, but expect no retaliation. Not that I'm out there trying to murder people. But the point is, we are so disconnected from our system that people can be murdering all over the world, and we don't see we don't feel the ramifications. We don't hear the screams. We don't feel the pulse in our own body weaken and weaken and weaken as more of us are just cast into genocide or cast into slavery or cast into colonial or imperial rule. And that disconnection is devouring us at our core. And so in my opinion, in the plane of pillars especially, like, I love how you said what you said about me being a white-skinned individual from Western Europe. Speaking as the way I do. I mean, I have a lot of mentors and friends. A lot of what I know, because of this. And all of my mentors and friends and brothers and sisters are indigenous or wisdom holders in their own way. And so I give respect and credence to them, of course. But all of so in the book publishing space, when you write a book, you go into the industry and you get blurbs. So these are other authors or, industry professionals, as you know, and I know books that you've blurbed, like you understand this. But for the listener, this is like industry reviews, peer reviews that are saying this book is great, this book is not great, whatever the fact is. And so when I finished The Plane of Pillars, my concentric mythology, retelling of Irish mythology, And like I said, I know a lot of indigenous writers and thinkers, and so I sent the book out to them, and they loved it. I mean, it just spoke their language. It was kinship. It was real. It was mythology in the true sense as they know it, and is still alive in many of their cultures today, whereas opposed to your and I's cultures, right, where it's not alive in our cultures at all, or at least most of our cultures, most of modern white, definitely Western European cultures. It's been, bastardized and pushed to the side by Christianity and kingship and monarchy and all the history of that space. And they loved it. And then a lot of the white writers of this world or readers of this world don't like it as much. And it was an interesting, not anomaly, because it was totally expected, but it's an interesting way of seeing connection, where those that are connected see connection and they say there's warmth there. Mm-hmm. Those that are disconnected see connection and there's fear there. There's a dark space there. They're fearful of the trickster, the liminal, whatever that might be, but there's fear there. There's darkness there. And it's why the book begins, a boy was born that day and 1,000 years more from the yellowing mane of a horse. It's the first line of the first sentence of the book. And you have to immediately accept the fact that a boy can be born of a horse, and that horse can give birth out of its yellowing mane. And I mean every one of these words. It's not hyperbole. It's not some simile. It's not some, external example. I mean this. The story begins with a boy being born from the yellowing mane of a horse today, but also 1,000 years more. And so even in this moment, what I'm asking the reader to do is to become associated. I don't need you to have a connection yet, but I need you to just, when I say connection, what I mean is a long-standing connection with the land as a land, rich and steeped in mythology. But I need you to come into the story, and I need you to accept that form and function may not be what you think. There's another dimension here, or maybe many more dimensions. So I need you to leave the singular dimension that you become associated with in this very disassociated world, this very disassociated fabric that we live in. And number two, I need you to forget time.
Yeah.
The boy was born today, and the boy was born 1,000 years more. We need to let go of time. When form and matter and time has been let go, magic with a K or a CK can now reign and rule. Mythology can have meaning. We can remember ourselves. We can participate in a silence, a rebellion against this machine of modern life. Because you could take everything I just said and pull it down. The myth of today is the machine. Disassociation, that's what the machine is. As long as the machine works, it's a good machine. But nobody ever asked if the machine does the good, capital G, work, right? So that's that myth of the machine. You could pearl everything I said down to that. But that machine is destroyed when silence has legs, when we remember, when myths have meaning, when we lose form and function and time, and we step into the fabric, the weft, and the warp woven threads of this unbelievably creative and beautiful tapestry writ by creator, God, great mystery, whatever, the divine in the truest sense. And then the story unfurls itself. And a lot of people get really lost, just to be very clear, and I think it's important to realize this. Like where you get lost in the book, I think is like, I don't mean this necessarily, but like kind of shadow work in its own way. Mm-hmm. So like there's a part where there's a musical instrument that creates the world, and the musical instrument's a harp, and it talks to Maguark, one of the chieftains of the evil people, the Oceaners, the Fomorians, is another word for them in Irish mythology. Those who come not from the underworld, but from under the ocean, which is below the underworld, outside of both heaven and hell, or the underworld and the regular world, or the above world. And Maguark has a conversation with the harp. And never in that conversation does Maguark say, but you're a harp. You're an inanimate wood-based object that creates music. You shouldn't be talking. You shouldn't have a soul. You shouldn't have a heart. You're just a harp. Never does that happen. Because in mythology, everything has meaning. And there's no room for challenging animism. Animism is accepted, which is why the first line of the sentence is, forget your material, your form, your function, and your time. Let animism rule. Animism in the true sense, not in any secondary sense that we use about it in a religious or spiritual way. I mean, animism in the sense that everything has a soul, agency, and self-determined power to unfurl its own co-creative energies according to its own trace, right? And then the story evolves. And so I think dismemberment is the ill of our time. And I think memberment, to some very large degree, is the cure, the medicine.
Yeah. It's funny you talked about silence with legs. It brought up a memory from when I was a kid. And I don't remember who taught this to me, but it's a little short story I'll share with you and everyone listening. And I hope I get it right because it's been a long time. A stink bug was was walking down a trail one day, and a centipede went past him. And he was so shocked at how many legs the centipede has, he yells out, he says, "Hey, how do you manage all those legs?" And he says, "I don't think about it. I just put one in front of the other, and I get where I want to go." And so the centipede keeps going, and all of a sudden the stink bug tripped and fell over and was on his back. And the centipede turns around and says, "Do you need some help?" And he says, "Yes." And the centipede flips him over and says, "What happened? You've only got 6 legs." He goes, "I don't know. I started thinking about it, and then I fell over." and that's kind of a story about the problems we have in the world today.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know. I started thinking about it, and then I fell over. And there's Gene Gebser's rational mental structure stage, and what happens if you lose touch with the mythic, the magic, and the archaic.
Yeah.
Because those were the parts when we weren't thinking about it. We were it expressing itself in the world as life.
Our family, we forage for most of our food outside of the field harvested meats that we consume. And so our daughter, she's just turned 7. She's very good at it. Her whole life has been foraging. So if she's hungry, she forages. Don't get me wrong. We travel and we visit friends. And so not everything that we eat is foraged, but to some degree, our daily diets are foraged foods. And her name is Elowen. And she's very good at it. And thinking about thinking and not thinking about being and what really is and all of that. It's interesting, when you were talking about the centipede, the image of her came to mind. We were out doing chores. We basically live outside, and our children live outside with us, and they're always around. They just do everything. Like they were our 4-year-old or 5-year-old and our 7-year-old were part of a massive cattle drive this morning because my wife was gone and I needed their help. And they did just fine of, almost 200 head of cattle. And so they're very, I don't know, they're children, but they're not exactly modern children, for good or ill. I think it's for good. And anyways, my son was out with us and he got stung by a bee, a ground nesting hornet right in the gullet, like right in his esophagus. Mm-hmm. He got stung by a real bad sting, really landed. And, he's flailing a little bit and his throat starts to close or whatever. And our daughter, Elowen, she just turned 7, as I said, and she immediately jumps down from where she was. She was near one of our 4-wheelers. She jumps down and she just starts it's almost as if she was like a person who really depends upon glasses and lost their glasses. I mean, she was just like on all 4s or 6s if you count your knees, and she's just throwing the grass all around, and the grass is probably 4 or 5 feet tall at the time, and she's just looking at the understory, just havocly looking in the understory. And she finds the plant that she's looking for, and she pulls the plant apart, and then she puts it in her mouth, and she starts to masticate it. Right, so allow the saliva and the mastication, the physical
making
mandible,
a poultice form.
And so she runs over to him. She spits out this salival, gooey gob, right, and she just throws it on his neck, and she pushes really hard. And his name is Weymouth, and she's like, "Weymouth, hold that there." So then she runs back, and while he's screaming and crying, and his green goopy gob is just dripping down the front of his shirt because it was a lot. She really masticated a lot of it. I turned around, and in the midst of all of it, in the midst of being 1.5 miles, maybe 1.75 miles away from home, on foot, for hours and hours, and it was earlier this summer, it was about 90 degrees, maybe 85, 90 degrees, and it's hot, and it's middle of the day. I mean, everything else is going on, and I found her kneeling over that plant, and I heard her just above a whisper. Not in any show, not in any sort of, "Dad, look what I'm doing, I'm being like you," not in any sort of mimicry, but a true sense of not thinking. She is on her knees, she's at the plant, and I heard her say, thank you for being here. Mm-hmm. Thank you for being here. And she just kept saying it. And again, just a whisper. Mm-hmm. Nobody could hear her. I only barely caught it. And I asked her later, I said, "Why did you do that?" And she said, "I don't know." And I was like, "Why did you go back over to the plant and thank it?" Because she didn't thank it before she picked it. That was her, she had any sort of
emergency.
It was an emergency. And she said, "Well, I was just so thankful that it was here. Because if it wasn't, what were we going to do for Gumpy?" We call him Gumpy as his nickname. But what were we going to do for Weymouth, for Gumpy? And it was just this thought of immediate thought. It was this moment of immediate thoughtlessness with the greatest amount of care.
That's a living myth.
It's living myth. Exactly right. It's a silence with legs. Mm-hmm. And it's saying it brings, a little bit of tears to my face, but I can, It's dependence. And I'm not saying everybody has to forage for their food, but imagine as a 7-year-old who's only ever foraged for their food in a loving, jaunty, sort of familial way, right? In the modern, like we have a modern moment where we have houses, stick frame houses, cob houses, whatever they are. We have these structures around us. We have civilization and a modicum of peace. It rains, the sun shines, the grass grows, agriculture still works. The world to some degree is collapsing, but the majority of us have a thin slice of a moment to have the peace we need to make foraging a gift and not a necessity.
Yeah.
And to be 7 years old in that gift, where foraging was always the pleasure and gift of life and never really a necessity of angst and ardor and fear, to have that relationship with the land, that's living myth. And so I think the reason I write is to provide stories that not just look backwards as two-way dream walking, I said, where we can dine with our ancestors and pave a pathway forward so our great-great-grandchildren can look back at us and say, you know what, they started it, and we're in a better place because of it. I write because of that. But in addition to that, it's to wake people up, not necessarily to only just themselves, their life, the liminal around them, the conscious, the unconscious marrying itself in this marvelous meeting ground between heaven and earth, or whatever we want to put words to it. It's really to also say, look what's possible. Look what's beautiful. And then the other side of our life is we actually illustrate that connection by bringing people out and teaching them foraging and doing ceremonies with them and going through the sacred harvest with them, to providing that material framework to the mythological heartstrings that the tellings provided. And so our life in some sense is binary in that way. But it's not binary in the truest sense. It's really just two different looks with a blink in between. It's not two sides of a coin.
Well, what you've just shared beautifully segues into what I wanted to ask you next. Bill Moyers once asked Joseph Campbell in an interview, which became the Power of Myth series,
Right.
What he felt the next world myth would be. And Joseph Campbell said, I don't know, but I know it will be world-centric. So I certainly hope that Joseph
What an
Campbell
honest answer. Yeah.
was correct. What do you feel the next world myth will be, and where do you feel it's likely to emerge from?
It's a really good question. I think there's going to be two simultaneous world myths created if we are to be saved. A dear friend of mine, he's Cherokee, and he says, at our worst, we'll ruin the mother's dermis, and at our best, will be the beautification of her skin. Like I don't think we're going to destroy Earth. I think Earth will kick us out long before then. I think she's knowledgeable.
She might have to.
She might have to.
I've had many conversations with Mother Earth about that, but I won't include them here because I've got too many other things to get through. But someday I would love to have a chance to talk to you without us having a schedule.
Yeah, no, I would love to. And so, I think there's going to be two simultaneous myths generated if we are to save ourselves, or if we are to participate in our own survival and saving. Because I think our kin around us want us to be saved. I don't think extinction is a happy thing. It happens. It's to some degree natural to our history, but it's not something to jaunt and jive about. I think it's worth grieving over. Mm-hmm. And the first one is a reconnection back to original source. And what I mean by that is people turning back to their own indigenous ways. So maybe a good friend of mine, Hakapetopa, he's Lakota. He talks about pre-colonial or pre-Columbian worldviews, a return to these pre-colonial, just simply we can call them indigenous worldviews of our ancestors, returning to that, learning our own languages, letting the ancient fairies and druids and Senekis and bards and shamans and, wisdom holders and medicine men and women, now traversing many different cultures, letting those come back to the fore, reawakening them from the graves, doing those shamanic dances. There's this phrase that we always say to each other in my family, there's always someone naked walking with a death rattle to the Hill of Tara. The Hill of Tara is the sacred spiritual center to some degree of the Irish people, and Ushnu is near it, and that's also sacred. One of them is feminine, one of them is female. I'm sorry, male, and one of them is feminine, and there's a lot of significance there. But there's always someone naked, that is to say, without the accoutrements of the modern day, walking with the death rattle to the Hill of Tara. Mm-hmm. And we need more of them. And then we need to open up and awaken Lu, the sun god, the creator who lives below the cat stone, but also Iru, the sovereignty of goddess of Ireland, Iru, Fada, and Banba, who sleep also underneath the hill. And my point is, there's a return there. There's not necessarily a physical return. I'm not saying everybody of Irish origin goes back to Ireland, just like I'm not saying in the 1930s everybody of German origin goes back to Germany. What I'm saying is there's an internal spirit return, an internal spirit return back to our own ways, to dine with our own ancestors. Very important. In addition to that, I think there's a worldwide turn to this, what I would call the indigenous worldview, generally put. That is to say, the true extension of place-based knowledge, the true extension of the indigenous food ways, the indigenous life ways, the indigenous thought and religious and spiritual ways. A dear friend of mine, I brought him up already, Taylor Keene, he's in Omaha, of the Earth and Bison clan, and he talks about the seventh generation, or the white buffalo calf prophecy, in the middle of the 19th century.
Yeah, I've heard about it.
2019 is the seventh generation. 4 white buffalo calves have been born, just like the prophecy, alluded to and called forth. And so, I mean, it's definitely a plains prophecy, but a lot of indigenous, the Anishinaabe, they have the seventh fire prophecy. There's a lot of really interesting prophecies coming into fruition right now. The seventh generation white buffalo calf prophecy of the plains people, the Oseti Sakawi people, which Omaha would be a little bit included into that, especially the Dakotas, which are, obviously integrated with the Omaha. That's the one I know best because of my own relationships, my own mentorship, and my own brothers. But basically that is, in the future, basically for the next 6 generations, the indigenous people were going to fall into a state of genocide and colonization and slavery and oppression. And the 7th generation, the 4th white buffalo calf will be born, the 4th albino buffalo calf. And there will be a series of buffalo calves born, that is to say. And in the beginning of the 7th generation, which happened in 2019, a new generation of storytellers, a new generation of human beings will arise to the fore to call back to the original indigenous ways, life, food, agricultural, spiritual, religious, all of these things, political. We'll call back to our original indigenous ways, and we'll turn back to those ethics, if you will, those world senses I write about in the book. There's a difference between worldview and world sense. Worldview is a belief of the world based upon what you can see to some degree. World sense is so much bigger than that. Not just the sensory structures of our body, but the sensory structures of our soul and the relationships and all of that liminal and beautiful space. And so I think those two things, I think a return back to our own source and a return back to the global indigenous consciousness that white people especially have been so good at killing, enslaving, pushing around, genociding, etc. It's going to be a release of that. And I think it's going to require a lot of pain, not in any sort of physical way, but a mythological pain, because America has our own mythology. And so as these new mythologies, which are just the return of old mythologies, come to the fore, we have to release the idea. So for instance, in Ireland, the Irish monks in the 700 and 800 ADs, basically deleted the ancestral language of the Irish people, wrote our stories down in Latin, and that's what we have today. So in order for the new mythologies, that is to say the ancient mythologies, to be reawoken, we have to at first come to confront the Latin Catholics among us, not to say that those are bad people, but rather that those are not holders of our truth. And our truth is much more ancient and held in languages that have been forgotten, but don't need to be forgotten forever. This is what the ancestral dream walking, the two-way dream walking, the looking back, so requires. So that's number one. And then number two is obviously this white buffalo calf prophecy of the pre-colonial worldview coming into the fore and watching the colonial worldview, the post-Columbian worldview wither. Unceremoniously, I think, if I had my druthers.
Yeah, I think you've got something there. I believe, whenever there's a mythic transition, it's well documented by experts in mythology that first culture begins to break down because it loses its guiding myth, but then there's the emergence of counter myths, which are often led by charismatic leaders, and we've seen this historically over time. And that's those charismatic leaders are the leaders of what are classified as isms, and so the one we are all familiar with is Nazism.
Right.
And so what happens is there's a clashing of the myths. Unfortunately, there's often wars that break out and a lot of bloodshed until the two myths merge and a new myth emerges that is a marriage of the domineering clash myth, of the myths that are clashing, the one that's got the most sticking power melds into the previous. So ours is a Judeo-Christian myth in the Western culture. And then what comes out is an amalgamation of those two. And so when you look at what we've got now with the emergence of scientism and transhumanism and paradoxically people saying, like the World Economic Forum, you have no soul, you're a hackable animal, there is no God. Yet right. Simultaneously, we have Ray Kurzweil telling us your soul will be uploaded to a hard drive and you'll be able to download it into a new body. So there, you right. see there's this total conflict inside of their own stories, right?
Yeah.
But clearly, you can read Steiner. I did a very comprehensive podcast, episode 250, Lucifer, Christ, Ahriman, and shared Steiner's explanation of what was happening and why we were going into this fusion with materialism and matter and machine, and why that was a necessary process for the human being to go through, which was ultimately to come to a definite realization that what we are is not matter and that we have to transcend matter or we will never realize who and what we really are, which is right. Spirit.
Right.
And so Steiner says it's a necessary process that we have to go through, but that it'll awaken us forever and we will never be stuck as the slaves of technological enterprises again. How long that might take is undisclosed. But certainly there's this clashing, and I think one of the reasons that this conversation with you is so important to me is because if you're in a myth clash, but you have no understanding of what myth is or how myth functions or how it breathes or the transformational process, then it's kind of like taking teenagers off the street and throwing in the middle of a battlefield after 8 weeks of basic training, but they don't really understand why we're fighting.
Yeah, I like that.
So it creates chaos inside of them, and they're already traumatized before they've even fired a single bullet. And we see plenty of that. I've had to work with quite a number of soldiers that came back from, the Middle East and various wars over the, last 20 years that shared some pretty shocking things with me about how they didn't really realize when they joined the military what they were getting into, but when they were in a battlefield, lightning struck, and now they're having a hard time getting their footing back. So there's going to be, and there is, look at what's going on in the world right now. We are definitely seeing a clash of myths, and there's a lot of people that are completely and utterly confused and scared, and so the point being is if they don't have this root understanding that we're talking about and that you write about so well, then what you get is an existential crisis of major proportion, and hand in hand with that, as I mentioned earlier, we have these rapidly escalating rates of suicide, and we even have countries now offering assisted suicide and encouraging it. Canada being one of the leaders in that, interestingly enough. And so I think it's very important for us to link back. The word religion means religio, to link back, to link back to the deeper truths of ourselves. And yoga, of course, means union. And I think that if we find our way back to some of these more ancient teachings, be it yoga or the problem with religion is it's really hard to find authentic religion that's not contorted and distorted and is taught by people wise enough to actually tell you what Scripture means in the way that it was meant to be, which is why I love Shankara's statement, no man can understand Scripture until he's enlightened, and when he's enlightened, he does not need Scripture. But when you have a world full of unenlightened people teaching Scripture, you get a lot of people that have a very hard time figuring out who they really are and why they're here. So I think one of the conundrums is not only our lack of understanding of myth, but our lack of wise elders and people with real wisdom to integrate us, which is what the whole rite of passage and vision quest ceremonies were designed specifically to do, so that they could survive multiple generations and stay in touch with the fabric of that which is essential and meaningful, which kind of lends again so beautifully to my next exploration with you. Paradox seems to be inherent right through what I read of your writings, such as the trees speak, the trees don't speak. There's a paradox. Osho once said, if you can't handle a paradox, you will never understand God. God, life, myth, and religion are full of paradoxes. God loves you, but will burn you in hell for sinning. What do you feel paradox represents within the human psyche, life, and what are your thoughts on the paradoxes of life? And how can we best work with them productively?
Wow. Yeah, that's a really, really good question. A really big question. I'll try my best.
Well, I'm sure.
Although it will be insufficient. I guarantee that.
You know, I'm sure if you just let the legs of silence walk through your mouth, it'll work out perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, the paradox, it's interesting. The question that came to my mind was, who was our elders? Which is not entirely different from what you were talking about earlier, too. I think mythology does a good way of expanding our eldership. I think it's improper for humanity to think that humanity is our elders singularly.
Yeah.
We have many elders, many indigenous cultures.
Even Elohim is plural.
Exactly. Yep, exactly. And I mean, there's many Plains tribes that I know and have spent much time learning with and sitting with, that claims that, there are a lot of their place-based wisdom, if you will, a lot of their traditional ecological knowledge in terms of habiting on Earth in a very positive and kincentric form, kinship and kincentric form, came from our animal kin, our four-leggeds and two-leggeds, the winged ones. Robin Wall Kimmerer, she's become famous for her book Braiding Sweetgrass, which to some degree is learning from our kin that are not humans, our otherwise human neighbors and cousins, if you will, the plant nations, the soil nations, the arachnid and bug nations, things like this. And I think as you pearl into that, as you really open your soul to these things, a serious level of connection is required. And it's an uncomfortable connection, and it's a paradoxical connection. It's paradoxical.
Bite.
Sorry?
A hornet's sting.
Yeah, exactly right. A lot of the books that I've written in nonfiction, like the book I wrote about a year and a half ago, to some degree is partially, it covers a couple topics, but one of the topics is what I call interspecial trauma or interspecial linkages, which is for the past maybe 7 or 8 years, I, with a couple other scientists in the University of Colorado and Utah State, have worked a lot in analyzing the fact that a lot of the studies, so like Rachel Bauer and Stephanie Huda, I think I have those names right, from Stanford back in 2011, 2012, and 2013, really popularized scientifically founded the idea of intraspecial trauma linkages. That is to say that if your mother was in a particular traumatic event and she processed her trauma through PTSD-like symptoms, and 20 years later she produces an egg, a male fertilizes that egg then bears the effects of the trauma, not the trauma itself. Things like this, science in some scientific way. So we understand that. Let's say we understand it scientifically and we understand it spiritually, because it has those two sides, and you can't just look at one instead of the other. But what if the animals that we consume, or the carrots that we consume, going back to the beginning, talking about acupuncture with carrots, what if we can actually inherit trauma, not just through reproductive genome, but through consumption of nourishment?
Well, I believe it's true.
It is, not that my book is definitive, but it's absolutely true, right?
I can tell you an experience that I did, and I've warned people, and this is why a diet is usually given by shaman before you use plant medicines.
Yes, exactly.
But once I had a guy who was doing a medicine ceremony with me, asked me, he wanted to eat chicken. And I said, I don't think it's a good idea for you to eat chicken before a ceremony. And he said, why not? I said, because you will probably have a very visceral experience of its death, and you won't like the experience. And I actually tested that many years ago. I said to my soul, I want you to allow me to experience what comes in when I eat an animal. So at that time I was working with LSD, And I waited for about 3 or 4 hours, so the medicine was in full strength, and I ate a piece of chicken. And man, I'll tell you what I went through. A visceral and powerful. My sympathetic nervous system was just jacked. I was sweating. I was shaking. I was having visions of the chicken being killed, and it was just like an overwhelming. It's not something that I would want to have to handle another person going through, because it's like, you know, when you're on the medicines and you can't ego regulate, you can't repress.
Yeah.
You can't repress the unconscious. It's something. It's like being thrown into a raging river. You got to ride it out. And I remember having a very strong appreciation and realization of why historically there has been carefully prescribed diets for medicine ceremonies. And so anyhow, my point is that I really do believe that, and when you consider what you're talking about with the majority, I mean, only 4 to 6% of the food on this planet is grown organically, which means no more than 4 to 6% of the food eaten on the planet is organic, which means most of the animals are coming from massive feedlots where animals are literally standing and living in their own urine and feces their entire lifetime, being injected and traumatized from the very beginning. Yeah. I mean, I mean, I'm not asking you, I'm making a statement, which is what would we expect to happen when you have, you know, the greatest percentage of the world population eating and sustaining themselves on perpetual, not only physical trauma and psychic trauma, but chemical trauma. I mean,
and generational. That's my professional life is this to some degree, and I realize that maybe I should hold my tongue because it's going to be another podcast. But to briefly touch on it, it's the understanding that in agriculture, regenerative, I don't care. I've been around regenerative agriculture for 15 years. I've keynoted every possible conference. I wrote 4 best-selling books in the regenerative ag space. I've been around regenerative agriculture, and I will tell you, all regenerative agriculture is a much better system, of course. Soil health, biodiversity, things like this, of course. But it's still a system of separation. And every single time you're going to separate the maternal, the mtDNA, array from its maternal genome, its maternal line, that matriarchy, right? You're breaking that generational trauma understanding, because if the major line, the mtDNA, is passing the effects of the trauma, but not the understanding of the trauma itself, as you separate the effects from the knowledge of the trauma, now we just have the effects without knowledge of that trauma.
Yeah.
Like, I'm repeating myself, but it's very important. And now that we only have this separated nature, and now we breed that separated nature, continuing to separate, wean, call, castrate, sell off your heifers, wean, call, castrate. You just get a line of an unbelievably intra-species, traumatic, unbreakable tether, line, bridge, whatever you want to call it, cord. And then the way we actually harvest these animals have been proven. And that's what my book is all about, the way we harvest these animals, to even exacerbate that even further. And so I once met a guy who couldn't eat meat, and I asked him, I said, well, have you ever had an uncastrated cow? I mean, let me cut your balls off and tell me how your life changes. So again, like, let's not cut the balls. Yeah, a lot. So have you ever had an uncastrated bull? And he said, no, because nobody eats uncastrated bulls. We all eat castrated bulls, which we call steers. That doesn't make any sense. You know, in the modern agricultural system, regenerative, sustainable, organic, permaculture, I have, you know, experience in all these ways. And no, you know, and he's like, no, I've never had a castrated bull. I said, have you ever had a non-castrated bull, so a bull fully intact with its dick and nut swinging between its legs, that was raised on its mom? Fully on its mom. That is to say, does it have a mom, a matriarch that it looks up to? Was it weaned? Was it ever castrated? Was it ever separated? No, of course not. Every bull is weaned, castrated, and separated. Every bull. That's why we call them steers. Have you ever had a bull that had its dick and nuts intact, that was connected to its mom, but was connected to its mom for 4 different generations, generation after generation after generation, in land, that is to say, rooted and grounded in place, so that that bull, when it was born, was an epigenetic, phenotypic, plastic, fluid being caged in a cage of bones and meat, right? That was at home in its landscape, at home in its family unit, at home in its herd, was able to express its bull-like nature, fight other bulls for alphaship or alpha supremacy or whatever you want to call it, And I went on and on and on and on. And he was like, no, of course not. And then I said, have we ever had an animal processed in a field in a concentric way? That is to say that animal literally gave you permission and consent to harvest it. Because again, my whole book, it's 500 pages, so I can't go through all of the details. But long story short, if that animal doesn't give you consent, really long story short, we see what's called dark cutting or acidification of meat. The pH drops. When the pH drops, it dark cuts. When it dark cuts, it can't process bacteria and other things well. But the other thing it does is it stops the oil phase from completing what's called the lipid phase, or the oil phase from completing what's called the lipid phase, the lipid profile system. And again, 500 pages, so I'm trying to give you the high level science, but you can read the book, you can look at it. But when it produces that, so basically when an animal goes through a non-consensual harvest, i.e. anything involving a trailer, anything involving a USDA or conventional or regenerative slaughterhouse that included bringing them there and putting them in a stall and going into a knockbox, which is the only legal way to do it, it leads to a state of 1, ketoacidosis, early stage ketoacidosis in the meat, even within hours. 2, which is early stage diabetes, of course. 2, you have high cortisol volumes in the blood, which the human immediately interacts with and processes and inherits, by the way. And 3, it reduces in up to, it's debatable. Some of the science says 20, some of the science says up to half, but let's just go on the conservative metric. Let's say more like 25%, a quarter, and decrease of the bioavailability of the nutrients in that meat. So if that meat, that cow, let's say, was raised marvelously in a regenerative pasture full of hundreds and hundreds of, vegetative plants, both warm season grasses and cool season grasses and forbs and legumes and all of these perennials and annuals and ephemerals and trees and shrubs and sedges and rushes and everything in between. And it was just this regenerative, carbon sequestering, rich soil organic matter, aqueous as hell, bacteria and saprophytic fungi flowing, and on the edges where the wood line is coming in and the wood line is extending in. So because you have trees and shade and marvelous and harmony and flowing music, you have some, mycorrhizal fungi flowing through there and predatory nematodes that are just cycling the shit out of the system. If that animal doesn't give you consent, the science tells you that a quarter of that is gone.
Yeah.
It is not bioavailable to the human. So after all of the questions, did you have a consensual harvest? And no. And so you're telling me you can't eat beef, but what you're really telling me is you can't eat modern, castrated, abused, traumatized, separated, and ketoacidosis, stress, out to the eyeballs, carbon or muscle fiber. I'm not even willing to call that beef, right?
Yeah.
And so that paradox is the level of complexity that becoming a student of your survival mandates is a relationship with both life and death, and a relationship with what I call chaos or the dawn darkness, that is the chaotic middle ground between life and death, when everything that is alive is just simmering from the warm to the cold, but it's not quite ready enough, not wombed enough. The gestation is not just there for the sun to rise, for the life to be reborn. I wrote a book about this in 2023. It's called Dark Cloud Country. It's all about the chaotic middle ground, using my Polish ancestrage mythology of Mokos and it's called the Suns de Vier and even Nivizica, a particular mythology coming from the Eastern European side of my family and heritage. But it talks about that dawn darkness. That's the paradox, when everything that is alive is also not alive, and everything that will be alive is present but not expressive. That chaotic middle ground is where I think the divine sits. I mean, that's a whole other and bigger conversation. But it's at that point where to love, you must kill. To kill, you must love. To dance, you must mourn. To have joy, you must grieve. That is that paradox, in my opinion, as I understand your question and as I understand the life that I've been given in the journey. And that's how it relates to mythology. Mythology presents a paradox of being because it says, be here, but the here is nowhere. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
Right? It says, a boy is born from the yellowing mane of a horse, and that's true. But that's also false. But by being false, it becomes true. Black elk, famous, I think, on Oglala Sioux, might have his particular tribe wrong. Generally of the Oseti Zakawi, the Plain Sioux peoples. Black elk was famous for saying in this interview, if you've never read Black Elk Speaks, it's a book compiled by John.
My library, yeah.
Oh, yeah, John Neidhart. It basically interviewed a particular chief, indigenous chief, I think of the Oglala Sioux, named Black Elk, towards the end of his life, towards the end of the genocide of the Plains peoples. And really termination of that myth in the truest sense. When I say termination, I mean the social termination. Obviously, it still lives and is alive and is becoming back into the fore for very good reason. And it brings me great joy to say that. But at the end of that period, and Black Elk says, before I begin, I must say something first. Everything I'm about to tell you is false. But if you think about it, you will see that it is true. That is, I think, the paradox.
Yeah. I think, too, that one of the things that's important for everybody that can understand the kind of the challenge of the paradoxical relationship that we are in with each other, with ourselves, and with life, and with nature, is that if we work with paradox in a healthy way, which I have to do all the time as a therapist, for example, I get holistic people that get cancer, yet they're now afraid. And before they had cancer, they would have swore up and down they would never do chemo and radiation. But all of a sudden now they don't trust their own philosophy that they walked around spouting for the last 30 years or whatever.
Right.
And then there's the paradox of, I've unfortunately have had a fair number of these happen, and that is young men who maybe are somewhere between 19 and 30 or 32, their girlfriend or their partner gets pregnant, and then in the first year, the changes in the woman and her kind of, how women are when they're, carrying, and then the first year when they're not getting any sleep and they got baby brain and they can be very emotionally aggressive, and it takes a fair bit of understanding to navigate that space. And they come to me and say, as much as I love my child, I just don't want to be married to this woman anymore, and I want to leave. What should I do? And that comes up a lot. So there you see a paradox. I love my child. I thought I loved this woman, but now I'm so unhappy in my relationship, I'm willing to abort this woman and my child. And so they're caught in the middle of this very torrential battle of love and disconnection, love and fear. I being challenged by the responsibility of love and relationship as we, and because our young men are not adequately prepared to evolve from I love to we love, and they don't understand that love always comes with responsibility. They're high on the sex, but they forgot about the responsibility. But the point I'm making is, and Jung did a very good job of bringing this out in his teachings, is that when we're facing a paradoxical situation, the best thing to do is not try to solve it, because you're at risk of using your ego, your intellect, to try to come up with a solution, but to sit with it and do what he calls holds the tension of the opposites. And he says the transcendent function arises out of the tension of the opposites. And so in alchemy, they call that sublimation, to rise above,
Right.
to get a big picture view. And oftentimes I will tell them, climb to the top of a water tower. And if the best thing you can do is climb up on the roof of your house, sit there and meditate and ask spirit for help on how to resolve this in a way that's best for everybody involved. And just the act of rising above induces the transcendent function, because you rise above. And I said, if the best thing you can do is stand on your kitchen table, write down your challenges on a piece of paper, put it on the floor, and stand on the dinner table and look down at it and open yourself, ask your soul to guide you. But out of this paradox, if we let go of having to take a side or polarizing ourselves, then the transcendent function brings us solutions that our conscious mind often can't even grapple with. It wouldn't even know how to come up with them. But it does take guidance from someone that can support you, because the ego and the pain and the discomfort so quick to try to medicate or to cut out.
Yeah.
And in alchemy, they call that cooking. They say you must cook with it. You got to sit in the fire and cook with it. And in this instant gratification culture, nobody wants to cook. Nobody wants to be uncomfortable. They just want to drug it out, cut it out, or get rid of it, or a divorce or something very fast without realizing the ramifications that has on the family structure for the long run. And I'm sharing this because I'm hoping people listening can realize that we're in a very paradoxical situation. We're in a very significant mythical transition. There's a lot of isms emerging. There's a lot of clashing emerging. There's a lot of confusion about what is true and what's not true, what is real and what's not real. And I think the first thing we have to do is set our intention on what is best for the world as a whole. How can I act in service to the planet? Because without the planet, we're all dead. How can I act in service to the living, breathing ecology? How can I act in service to my own needs, but also the needs of humanity as a whole right now? And that takes somebody who's willing to have enough love in them to be genuinely interested in what is best for all. And I think that that's something that people need coaching on too. I think we're as disabled in our authentic understanding of love and how to live love and the responsibilities of love as we are with most everything else. But myths are always brought in by shaman, by poets, by artists, sometimes musicians and storytellers. But the myths come in not through the consensus. They come in through the non-consensus.
Yeah.
And I think that it's up to those of us that live in the non-consensus and have the space in us to hold on to the tension of the opposites. And I again think that's probably a lot of what's happening with your books. And you've written quite a number of them. So there's obviously a lot of spirit moving through you. I'm sure you have the experience at time. I'm working on a 15-volume set, and I've written 12 books. So there's times when I'm writing where it's as though I'm being written through. It's like, wow, like it's just flowing out of me, and I don't even know where all these words and ideas and concepts are coming through. So I think the oversoul of humanity and the oversoul of Mother Gaia are holding hands and grabbing hold of those of us that are vessels that can carry this and bringing it through. And I really hope children like yours, and I sense that very deeply in my own, because my kids are very much like you've described yours to be. And many that are on the planet and coming onto the planet now are going to be able to hold the tension of the opposites and channel in the wisdom that needs to be on the planet now. Yeah. So really, in essence, what I'm saying is the best way to deal with a paradox is not try to solve it, but let yourself arise, let yourself be carried into the transcendental function, the transcendence, and let the paradox guide you, which is sort of counterintuitive for people.
Yeah. It's this sitting with the paradox or rising with the paradox. It's for culture or people who don't spend a lot of time sleeping outdoors or sleeping near to the outdoors or being outdoors. I think it's a weird concept that the dawn darkness, that is to say, the blackness before the dawn, is the coldest point in the morning. If you're sleeping outdoors and you have inadequate clothing, that is to say, you didn't, take your house with you and glamp or something like this. The dawn darkness is what you fear the most in the cold season. It's the coldest point of the dawn. It's the coldest point of the night. It's right when the light is about to rise. It's very cold and it's uncomfortable, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And it's very important, I think, to be there, to sit with it and to rise with it. I think that's very true. And I think the non-consensus, it's a really interesting thing to bring that up because to some very large degree, authors, as I said today, are the bastard oral storytellers. And it is what it is. We do our best to tell oral stories on podcasts like this. And we have gatherings where we light a massive fire, especially at Beltania. In the beginning of May, Beltania light these two great fires, and you pass between them and you burn off the old year. And it was cool. One year we got to do a prescribed burn where we lit about 100 acres on fire, and we had a road between, and we had 100 acres on fire on the other side of the road. And it was at the beginning of May for Beltania. So think of like a 200-acre bonfire. And then we passed the cows between it to burn off the old season, right? And it was very symbolic. It was a ceremony-rich process. So at Beltania, right, you have these fires and you have these telling stories, and then that's great. But most of us, the writers among us, who spend their time putting ink on page, like your 12 out of 15 book set, right? Like the writing, it's holy, it's sacred. I mean, it's sacred in some true sense. This oversoul that you're talking about, just coming through you and putting words on page, it's all true. But so much of what is written has the aroma of consensus, because if you're not consensus, the book doesn't sell. Especially if you're going to try to publish it. Like I've tried to publish most of my books, and it's interesting. The book I wrote last year, I tried to publish it for 9 months. I went through the agenting process. I would talk to publishers, et cetera. And I had many publishers. I had one of the big 5 publishers tell me that they thought that this book was going to change the world in ways that other books that they've published was able to change the world that I won't give attention to in this moment. Just too big of a conversation to put it there, but a massive. They were like, this is going to be huge. But I need you to do these things. And I wasn't willing to do those things. They wanted me to take story out of it. They said, nobody wants to read story. They just want to be told what to do. And I said, I don't think anybody wants to be told what to do. I think they need story.
Amen.
I don't think they know themselves. And so anyways, the issue with writing, as you know, the issue with doing anything is, to some degree, you have to figure out how to be a bridge between where people are and where they need to go. That's true. And at the same time, in order to truly write mythology in the truest sense, in order to tell mythology, to speak mythology, to be there in this moment of living earth, and to have that living groundedness to you, you have to be non-consensus. You have to be dream-walking forward and backwards. That is the definition of non-consensus, which means that the book isn't entirely marketable. I get it. Most people who buy The Plain of Pillars, I think it's rated like 4 stars right now on Amazon or something like that. And what that means is that some people think it's a 2-star book and some people think that it's a 5-star book. And I appreciate that. And I love every star because, it's not consensus. This book is going to make some people mad. The book is going to be written in a way that you're not used to because all you do is read modern stories that's in consensus, right? The true author, the true teller, the true Shanaki in my culture, we are out of consensus. And what we're trying to do is build a bridge between what is consensus and what is non-consensus. Not to make what is non-consensus consensus, but to make truth truth, to make the light light, to make the darkness the dark, and have no misconceptions about the thing, no disconnection, no dismembering, as we talked about, the modern myth of today. Let that go. And so finding a new pathway forward, it takes community, it takes courage, I think, but it also takes a particular viewpoint on the end. A dear friend of mine changed my life. I brought him up earlier, Topa Lakota, and he said, Daniel, because I was talking to him about some personal pains I was having, all dealing with outcomes, personal outcomes in my life. One of them being not traditionally published in one of the big 5 presses was one of the things we were talking about. And he said, Daniel, your entire hope is based upon the outcome. Mm-hmm. What you need to do is, basically, long story short, he said something to the regard of, you have to place your hope in the idea that Creator put you on earth to do something, to be something, to breathe something, to dance something, to create something. And that something is the outcome. Not that it exists in a good way or a marketable way or an economic way or a social way or a world-changing way, or that you're able to solve climate change, or you're able to totally transform the way food is processed in the United States from a destructive system that relies on cortisol to a beautiful system that relies on consent. That's outcomes. But be here to do what Creator put on the earth for you to do. Write about that. Yeah. Dance about that. Rejoice about that. Grieve about that. And we went on and on and on. And it was a world-changing moment in my life. But everything changed. It's the essence of what oral storytelling is. It's the essence of what mythology is, to beckon the reader into a new state of living, a new view of the world. That is to say, an old view of the world, a view held for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years through exponentially large lines of genetics and love and intimacy and pain and death, right? And grief. That's the paradox, as I understand it. And let that spirit flow, even if that big 5 publisher says, we'll pay you $100,000 to publish this book if you take the stories out, and you say no, because the stories are what matters. Like, even if it means that. And sometimes it means more than that, and sometimes it means less. It doesn't always mean something akin to that.
Yeah, it's a paradox. Yeah,
how to be modern but not modern.
Yeah, just to share a publishing story with you, when I wrote my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, we ended up having to publish it ourselves, but I started writing it in 2000, and I had a very, very successful literary agent named Margaret McBride who had published the 1 Minute Manager book series and a number of others. She had a lot of big sellers under her belt, and we did a trip to the publishing houses. We went to New York and we visited 10 of the major publishers, and I anticipated that when they sat with me, they were going to ask questions. And so I brought my toolkit that I use when I work on patients and athletes and people when I travel the world to measure things like posture and core function and et cetera. And sure enough, pretty consistently they were saying, "Oh my God, what you're saying is amazing. I want to get rid of this belly fat. I got this back pain, ... And so I would do some assessments right there in the meeting room and say, well, here's what's going on with you. And they would go, oh my God, that you're describing exactly what I feel. And I'd say, so here's how you go about it. Well, the conclusion in almost every case was the publisher said, if what you say in this book is true, it means almost every single author that we've published is wrong. And if we publish this book, we're going to have a coup in our hands. And I said, so what you're telling me is you're actually more interested in publishing false information that sells than you are publishing the truth to help people. And they said, we're sorry, that's just how the business works. Yeah. So that's when, Penny and I had already published one book prior, so we knew how to do it. And we just decided we'll do it ourselves. And that book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, is now sold 250,000 copies, but we had to do it ourselves. Yeah. But this is just sort of the reality, and there's another paradox of the world we're living in. Everywhere you go, the truth is seldom accepted with open arms.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's trust there, Like a friend of mine, I brought her up already. Shalita Zany is her name, a Mokopona, a grandmother of the Waitaha people. And she says in Maori they have this saying, this myth, if you will. But they're an ocean people. They're ocean meets mountains people and water people. And she says, as far as you can throw your net, you have to have faith that, she would say, that grandmother has you, that she can feed you, that she can heal you. If you're sick, throw your net. The medicine is there. If you're hungry, throw your net. The food is there. If you're lonely, throw your net. The community is there. And I think that's a marvelous way of going through it, but you have to be fearless. Which is something that my friend Wanko Petopa, the Lakota man, pup carrier, has told me time and time and time again. You have to be fearless, not courageous. Courageous is just being courageous, meaning that you're in an airplane, you have a parachute, and you packed the parachute, and you tied it tight, and you know how it's going to unfold. That's courageous. That's meaning you're going to be daring with full knowledge that you're safe. Fearlessness is jumping out with ever checking the parachute. Don't be fearless if you're going to go, parachuting. Be fearless if you're going to be a human, but don't do those other things fearless. Fearlessness is knowing that if you throw the net, Mother has you in the true sense. Yeah. Whatever you need is there.
Deep trust.
Deep trust. It's faith in the truest sense.
Yeah.
Right? It's silence with legs. It's remembering. It's all of these things that myth is. It's to be fearless. And, when we were in the field and Weymouth got that bee sting and his esophagus and his throat was closing, Winnie, our daughter, Elowen, we call her Winnie. Winnie was fearless. She had a faith that what she needed was already given to her, just not yet. Right, which is, again, that chaos stage, that paradox we're talking about. The dawn darkness is light, just not yet. Yeah. Right? It's rebirth, just not yet. That is the chaos. I use the term chaos less than paradox, but that's the chaos, the paradox. It's this gift was already given to her, just not yet. She had to find it. That's faith. That's fearlessness. I think it's what myth calls us into being. I think it's the indigenous worldview that the Western hemisphere, in terms of not the West Hemisphere, but the Western civilization, the Western thought, the Judeo-Christian reality of today, the white people, if you want to be a little bit too colorful about it, is what we've lost, right? And so as we dive back into myth, we dive back into ourselves, but we also dive into a much more ancient version of ourselves that has been lost for thousands of years.
Yes.
And as that heals, we heal. And as that heals and we heal, the we turns into a capital we, and we heal laterally. So we fix the vertical, the warp, and then we fix the horizontal, the weft. And that's that beautiful tapestry that I think is totally possible. But it requires, like you're saying, I mean, it requires standing in the cold. It requires dealing with the paradox. It requires reading hard things, doing hard things, not in any sort of modern way, but doing hard things in the sense that maybe what is needed is a very tumultuous, blood-covered field harvest, not a trip to Whole Foods to buy the packaged ground beef. Like, it's different for everybody. I get it. And there's not one trace for every person. But it also requires telling stories that are hard, that begin with, there was a boy born of a yelling mane of a horse, 1,000 today and 1,000 years more. I mean, that's a very hard thing to manifest in your own life. And then the horse goes through the sex process, if you will, the reproductive process. And the horse, her name is Pryderi, she rolls in the mugwort patch, and Mother Mugwort and her create a baby together. And I need you to understand that. And why does that matter? And it's unification between the four-leggeds and the animal kingdom. And after the animal kingdom come the male kingdom. That's the Omaha creation understanding of not a hierarchy, but that the plant kingdom comes first because they feed the animal kingdom, and the animal kingdom comes second, and then the human kingdom comes after that. And what humans have done is put themselves at the top of that, whereas we are at the bottom. We are the servants in some sense. And so that's to some degree what's happening. So we have to accept that, and it's difficult. But God, is it beautiful? Maybe not my writing. We can all, debate that. Maybe the way I told the story could have been told better, but the idea is beautiful. And when we start to see ideas as beautiful, I don't know. I don't think that anything could stand in the way. AI, not worried. Machines, not worried. Because Earth, Mother, is powerful. Yeah. And all we're doing is relating. In the truest sense, the soul sense, as you said hours ago, that relationship is at the soul level. Yeah. Reciprocity is at the soul level. And as long as we're there, I don't know. I think remembering is the greatest act of rebellion there is. I'm not saying don't fight. I'm not saying don't do, therapy. I'm not, because I do therapy. I'm not saying don't pick up a sword or pick up a pen or, go stand in a riot or say your mind. Like, I do all these things. But remembering, I think, is the greatest act of rebellion. And we're so poor at remembering.
Yeah. One of the thoughts that came to me from reading your book that you sent me, Path of Pillars, is that it's not a book that you should think about. It's a book that you should let rise up inside of you. It should activate your imagination and your curiosity and your wonder. It gave me the urge to go light a fire in my fireplace because it felt like it needed the fire to carry the story, like warmth carries thought in the human being. Yeah. But I think part of the problem is that we've become so trapped in our intellects that we don't seem to have room inside of ourselves for something that we can't rationally put into a string of thoughts that A squared plus B squared is C squared kind of thinking. So I really think that we also need to return back to the child inside of us because the child can embrace these concepts. And I think as a therapist, one of the things that I see as a very common theme amongst people with real life challenges is that they have lost touch with the curious, childlike, spontaneous, gregarious, authentic expression of life and self within them, and that I have to do a lot of work with soul recovery and bring back their consciousness of the child and the need. And it's pretty wild when I do soul recovery on people, and my wife Angie Chek's an expert at it as well. The strangest things will happen. Like, people will say, "Oh my God, I can see colors that I don't even remember seeing before," or "I can hear better," or "I can smell things I've not smelled before." I've had cases where people had numbness, maybe from distribution into their little finger, which often happens with thoracic outlet, or they have symptoms of lumbar nerve root compression, but there's not an orthopedic cause of it. And all of a sudden, after a soul recovery session, their sensation comes back, for which any medical doctor would never believe, because there's no orthopedic justification for the return of that sensation. And so when we integrate those parts of the child's psyche back into us, it brings back what was repressed with the trauma that caused the fragmentation of the soul. And so I think part of what I'm saying here is that I think it's because there's so many repressed children and that we've become so detached from our childlike nature that there's not enough adults that can actually really appreciate what it is that you're conveying to them. And that we probably need to take your books to the summer camps all over the world and have them read at night by the fire, and it would spawn a whole new generation of young people that are awake.
Yeah. Our daughter, she's 7. She cannot read. I believe in that. My philosophy on homeschooling is different. But she cannot read, and that's intentional. But she listens to, it's an audiobook. We have an audiobook. And she listens to it all the time, and she loves it. The Plane of Pillars. And I always tell people, if my 7-year-old can understand it and you can't, it's because your curiosity, your imagination in the true sense of the word is not present. We have to practice that, right? Because that inner child, I think, is born with that curiosity, that imagination, that just like world sense that this is true, that it's really true. In our family table, every day, I get asked by one of our 3 children, who is this? Because there's a slab of meat on a plate. And they'll say, who is this? And I'll say, this is Senna's bull calf, Simon, or whatever his name is. And they were there. They were covered in blood. They were there when it was born. They got to hold, Simon's placenta when he came out. We have 200 head of cattle. I mean, this is not like we have 4 cows in the backyard. I mean, like this, it's cool that they get to participate in this. And then they were there for the field harvest, and they were there for the processing. Because, I mean, I teach finer beef processing, beef, goat, and lamb processing for USDA centers, and I mean, like the finer butchery and things. I teach all over the country on these things. And so we have a little training facility here that we do courses in, and they get to do that. And my daughter understands. I mean, all of our kids understand the finer aspects of what meat is meat, and what makes the sirloin as opposed to all of these details. And they always ask, who is this? Not what is this? Not what cut is this? No, she knows all the cuts. She knows all 200 different cuts of a cow, but she always asks. Or even our 4-year-old, Sequoia is her name, Sequoia Haldis. She's 4, and even she asks, Dad, who is this? And it's that level of creative, imaginative energy, that life force that is so innate within them. And then you reach, an older individual who reads fantasy or science fiction to escape from the world, not to meet the world, right? And mythology is the opposite. Mythology is the opposite of escapism. I do not want you to escape into this tale. Although you might actually reach a curious imaginative power that ascends the general consciousness of your mind, and it might feel like escapism. But what I'm asking you to do is dive deeper into yourself, like you were saying. I had one friend who runs a medicine. I don't know. They do medicine retreats in the west of England in Devonshire, and she said. I started reading it, and I realized that this would be much better on mushrooms. And so they all did just like mushrooms, and they read
For sure.
Right? And it's just like, I guess that's true. Because full integration, full intimacy requires a higher brain frequency. And I don't necessarily mean that purely, but I think I might, I mean, it requires that higher brain frequency. And so many of us read by sitting back. To some degree, with The Plane of Pillars, my book, really requires us for us to lean in. And I think that's a first step. It's like practiced life. We are so unpracticed our lives are so unpracticed in the act of living that we have to practice living to once have life again.
Yes, I really think that's a very deep fundamental truth. It really, really is, which is one of the reasons I teach people it's very necessary to have periods of unbound play where you're playing without an outcome objective. You're playing for the sake of playing, which is what James Cars would call an infinite game versus a finite game where there's a winner and a loser. And this is why I teach people rock stacking. And I say, look, I wait for the rock stack to fall over and watch them start criticizing themselves and getting all judgmental. And I say, you realize that's just a pile of rocks right there, and it's just supposed to be an act of unbound play. So witness that in yourself, and when it rises up, step out of it and celebrate the fact that there is no grade. Your paycheck does not depend on it. This is a chance for you to reconnect to your child and to nature and just to the beauty of creativity and the act of creation. And it's amazing to me. And I know in my own life, just because of the pressures I've had to carry, founding and running an institute and everything else, traveling the world for 25 years, almost nonstop, and dealing with patients' lives and having to have space inside of myself for their lives, that when my soul guided me to unbound play, it was miraculous, the healing effect that it had and the ability for me to have more space in myself, not only for others, but for myself, and how the little boy in me that could play without feeling like dad was watching and there was repercussions, or that a school teacher was grading. It was just so wholesome. And I really feel that everybody listening should seriously consider taking time as often as possible to identify what it is that you can do, from playing a drum or just grabbing an instrument and just playing, not because you're good or bad, but just for the act of playing, dancing for fun, throwing a football or a frisbee for no outcome. I mean, anything that you can do with no outcome objective whatsoever, I think it has a powerful healing effect. It activates the right brain, and it has a very strong integrating effect on the psyche and on the body as well. Yeah. And it's paradoxical, because many of the people that come to me are in a real crisis, and so is the world. And the point I'm making is, right now, we all need to play a lot more to bring ourselves to the space of open receptivity, so that we can be guided from our heart to find that transcendent function, instead of trying to get there with our head, because our head is not the right vehicle to get us to the space we need to be now.
Yeah. A dear friend of mine, a true brother, Dane Scott, he's a Maori musician maker. He makes the traditional instruments of the Maori people. And he told me very poetically, I'm going to butcher it in my regurgitation, but he said, when you play music, it's very modern of us to think that you can play music wrongly. Every sound that you can make is a sound of the mother. And if it's good enough for her, it's good enough for you.
Right.
And so play with abandon. I love that. I think that is so true. It's why, and I realize this is weird, because my whole life is writing. Well, I guess I do a lot of other things too, but I feel like my whole life is writing. That my child's, especially Winnie, the oldest, doesn't really read. And there's a level of reading. I think humanity from a very young age, modern humanity, Western civilization, especially this classical education, just like music, we teach reading very early, because we want them to experience the world of books. And I get the idea. And it's just my brain against theirs. So maybe I'm wrong. But when a child dreams, it's unbounded. It's like you're saying, it's unbounded play. But when a child reads a book, it's bounded. It's bounded by syntax. It's bounded by grammar. It's bounded by the conception, the internal self-check that you're not able to read as fast as your body wants you to read, because you're not a good reader yet. You don't know the language. You don't know how to read as fast as maybe I know how to read, an adult, right? And so it's constantly bound by these structures. Yeah. But I mean, history becomes, forgotten when language becomes written. As soon as we can write it down, we forget it.
Well, you can put it on a shelf.
You can put it on a shelf. And so the second we have a purely written culture, not an oral culture, memory goes by the wayside. And if what I'm saying is we live in a time of reawakening memory, we can't let that oral idea of deep memory go by the wayside. And so, yeah, expose them to books, expose them to reading. Don't let them be stupid. You got to follow, the state's school systems, general, requirements for what stupid means. Fine. I mean, we all have restrictions, and we can all get around those restrictions. But What I'm saying is it's really important. Find what you need to do as a parent, in my opinion, per child in an individualized basis to allow them to dream unbound, unhindered, unlimited, dream, play, same thing in the way I'm using it now for as long as possible,
Yeah.
even if that extends into their death, like when they're 80, 90, 100 years old,
Yeah.
right? I mean, just that to me is central, which is, again, not to be unbelievably repetitive, but that's the foundation of myth. It's let's dream together. Let's release the bounds on what human reproduction is, and let's be born from horses and mugwort, right? Let's be unbounded from this concept of Judeo-Christian, creation genesis, and let's look at what would happen if a tree and a harp got together and created the world. What would that look like? Let's play with it. Like, how cool is that?
Well, they did. We just forgot.
in my opinion, that's unbelievably true and powerful and membering. That has the capability of membering us to ourselves and to each other once again. Each other being both human, Homo sapiens, and all of the other kin. It has power, I think.
Yeah. Well, Daniel, there's other questions I had on the list, but my fear is you and I can talk for hours on any one of them, and we've already got a good 3 hours of podcast.
Good.
And I think we've covered what's most important for anyone listening to hear. I couldn't honestly have expected a more truthful, beautiful expression from you as my guest in dialogue here, and I'm grateful for everything you're doing. And I guess if anything, I would encourage you to keep doing what you're doing, and I really hope I'm around long enough to see what your kids take on as their path, because I know they're going to be very, very powerful healers for the planet, and maybe they'll find my children too, because they're also very powerful beings that teach me a lot every day. And why don't we just give you a minute here to share any final thoughts, and then anything you want to offer as far as where to find your books or websites or anything you'd like to share as we close out.
Yeah, I really appreciate you, Paul. I know we were connected by a mutual friend, but I've been a fan of your work, and I know many people who know you or are acquainted with you or have studied with you, and they all say the same thing. And so it's a blessing. It's an honor.
Thank you. I
really see it as a expression of hope that we got to talk, and there's people like you that exist. And I think that's what's living. In terms of how people can interact, I think starting on my website, it's just my name, danielfirthgriffith.com. If you're interested in the book, it's available everywhere, all over the world online. You can go to Walmart and Target and Barnes & Noble and Amazon. The only thing I like to tell people is on Amazon, it's worth, I think it's $18.99. And on my website, it's worth $18.99. I make about $14 if you buy it from me, and I make about $1.14 if you buy it from Amazon. So buy the book, please. Please buy the book.
From
do it
Daniel's website.
However you like. The structures of today really separate the writer, the teller from the community of readers. And I hate that. I buy books on Amazon when I absolutely have to, but if you start on my website, you'll get linked over to Amazon if you need be. But I would love to connect with you. I would love to be friends. I would love to sign the copy and put some blessings and prayers in the book. When I send it, I send all of the books.
That's beautiful.
We live in the middle of nowhere, central Appalachia, on the western side of Seneca, and there's no stoplights. There's no stop signs. There's one building in our community. There's 109 of us that live here in the middle of nowhere, and it's a post office. So I get the luck of walking out of my driveway right to the post office. And so I would love to mail you a copy.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, just start there. There's everything you need there. I have a Substack.
Your website's beautiful too, by the way. I appreciate that. I really enjoyed reading it.
Oh, good. I don't spend the time I need on it. So that means more than you know. Well,
for a guy who's a country pumpkin, you got a website that's attractive and easy reading, and really, I thought it was great.
Oh, good. I'll put that on my next book. Paul Chek, describing me, country pumpkin. I love it. I love it. I love it.
You know, as you know, it's a slang to say you're not a city dweller. You live in nature.
Yeah. No, it's good. I love it. I love you, Paul. I appreciate you. Thanks for the thanks for the
I
time.
have deep love and respect for you too. It's in Kyle. You know, he said you'll love Daniel. He's the real deal, and I'm like, everybody Kyle's ever recommended has always been good, and you know, Kyle's very deeply into everything we've talked about, and he's one of my best friends on the whole planet. I mean, I absolutely love Kyle Kingsbury. He's a real man, and there's a lack of those in the world. And so I have more to thank Kyle for sharing you with me and my audience has Kyle to thank for that too. And so, well, thank you, Daniel. Why don't you spell your name, because it's an unusual name, just since it's part of your web address. Daniel is obvious. Firth Griffith.
Yeah, so Daniel, Daniel. Firth, Firth, and then Griffith, Griffith.
And there's a hyphen in there, is there?
There's no hyphens, no.
So just Daniel Firth Griffith.com?
Yeah, and if you type into Google Daniel Griffith author, you'll get hundreds of people trying to link you to my website.
Okay, great.
It's the weird thing when you publish a book. It's you know it.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Google knows you.
Yeah, more than some people's mothers do, unfortunately. And not for the right reasons either. Well, thanks to all of you guys for listening. I hope you've made it to this point in our amazing journey together. I hope you feel reconnected and inspired to do some unbound play and to hold the tension of the opposites and climb up to the roof of your house and meditate before you leave your wife and kid and or husband. And I hope you feel more deeply connected to myth now. And I'd like to say thank you to our amazing sponsors for all the amazing products you create, and for any of you that buys from them. You're supporting organic, biodynamic, free-range, regenerative farmers because that's where they get their materials from to make the products, and a little bit supports the podcast. So you get healthy, we keep moral and ethical companies healthy, and we keep me in the podcast so I can have more conversations like this amazing one. And thank you to all of you for being the change the world needs now. We got to do it together. As I often say, it's time to circle the globe and hold hands and sing together and open ourselves to great possibilities and dream together. And I look forward to sharing something amazing with you next week. And Daniel, let's not make this our last podcast. Let's make it our first.
Sounds good.
Whenever you have something you feel is important to talk about or that your soul's calling you to, send me a little write-up of what you'd like to talk about, and chances are really, really good we're going to do it.
Sounds good.
I want to stay connected to you because you're a great spirit. And
appreciate you.
I don't want to lose contact with you because you're a cool man.
I appreciate you, Paul.
All right,
Same.
You too. Lots of love, everybody. Talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Gym with Paul Chek and today's guest, Daniel Firth Griffith. You can find Daniel online at danielfirthgriffith.com, where you can also browse his books and other writings. His award-winning books include The Plains of Pillars, which is the first book in the Rim Walker series, Stag Time, Wild Like Flowers, and Dark Cloud Country, and they can also be found on Amazon. Follow Daniel on Instagram at daniel.firth.griffith and on Substack at danielfirthgriffith.substack.com. For more interaction with Paul and to share ideas and ask questions about topics discussed in this podcast, we invite you to join his Spirit Gym program and community. There are 3 different levels of membership, and you can participate in live Q&A sessions with podcast guests, access the members forum within the Spirit Gym community, where you can chat with other members, attend weekly virtual meetups with Paul, and study his comprehensive Master Key online program. You can explore the options and subscribe today by going to myspiritgym.com. And finally, if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a warm review on the podcast platform of your choice. This podcast is available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and YouTube.